Well, hello. Welcome to the Horror Screams podcast, part of the Horror Screams Video Vault website, episode 22. I'm Stephen, and we're here with another exciting episode of Horror Chat and the like. And I'm here with our regular co-host, Sarah. Hello, Sarah. How's it going?
Hello there. It's all very good, thank you. Looking forward to a very nostalgic episode.
Yes, nostalgia. Thy name is us. Yes, nostalgia galore. Good God. We're going all the way back to the 1990s. Yes.
All the way back. Oh my God.
I'm disturbed by how long ago that is because it feels like it was last week.
Well, yeah, you say that. You say that, and then you think, yeah, the 90s wasn't that long ago. And then when you actually try and think of a top 10, which is what we've had to do, we've gone, oh my God.
Holy
I can't
moly.
remember half of them. It's been so long since I watched them.
The films were in black and white. We left our doors undone, our back doors undone.
Absolutely no mobile phones.
No, but actually, that's true. Yeah, no internet until a certain part of the 90s.
Yeah.
I don't think. Did I have the internet? I had the internet, I think, for the first time at home in. Actually, maybe it was 99, I think, ish. Which is weird.
See, I shunned it. I shunned all that kind of stuff. I was like, little bit hippified. I didn't have a mobile phone for quite a while after everyone else because I was like, no, they're evil things. So I don't think I bothered with the internet until at least the end of the 90s, beginning of 2000s.
Sure. Yeah.
So
and
old.
Of course, and it wasn't the internet that we know. It was this weird archaic box thing with a light that would go off if somebody answered the phone.
Yeah, it screamed at you.
Yeah, it's loading. And if you were trying to get yourself off with a saucy picture of Richard Gere or something, it would take 4 years for the picture to load.
You just get the top half and just be like, oh,
it's on its way.
Excited.
Oh,
yeah,
no, it's crashed. Mum's just tried to call someone. Mobile phones, the only thing you could do is send a text or do a phone call, strangely enough, which no one does now. There were no cameras on them. There was a game of Snake, at least on my one.
Snake. Yeah, Snake was great.
In England, or maybe just in Norfolk, the big phone to have, I think, at a certain stage was the Nokia 3210. I think that was 3310, one of those.
Yeah, one of them. Everyone had to have them. Yeah, no, I don't think that was just a Norfolk thing.
That's all right then. Although I had a Sony Ericsson mobile phone with a bit, what seemed like a small aerial at the time, but now probably a huge aerial sticking out of it. And it was a flip phone.
Yeah.
But I was excited
flip
because
phone. Wow, you were one of the cool people.
It was really cool, and I was excited because on X-Files, Mulder and Scully would spend pretty early going for the mobile on their show. They would spend most episodes calling, and I think at one stage or maybe one season, at least one of them had a flip phone. I was like, wow, I'm just like Mulder.
Yeah.
Of course, I was nothing like Mulder. We're talking about the 90s. I mean, more specifically, not just mobile phones, although we've got a 4-hour discussion on that, but horror in the 90s. There was a lot of horror. As in films, not just the fashions. The shell suits. Were shell suits the 90s?
No, that was 80s. Yeah, 80s, I think people. I'm pretty sure they're still around today, but I'm pretty sure I was into the whole shell suit thing in the 80s.
Yeah. And there was some crossover. Like you still see mullets and stuff in like 1990-ish films. I think there's some crossover there, as there was with flares in the early 80s stuff. But yes, so we'll be talking about 90s horror. We'll be giving you, because we know you really want to hear it, our top 10 90s horror films with some honourable mentions. Because it turns out, when we looked, at first we thought, there's only 3 good horror films in the 90s. But when we looked, there turned out to be more than 3 and more than 10. And there's some really good ones. And there's some ones that we've watched time and time again and thought, wouldn't mind going back and watching so-and-so. So, it's quite exciting, actually. I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to start with our recently seen and go from there. But yes, it's all about the 90s a little bit later on. So, first of all, our usual business. It's been a month since our George Romero podcast. Unbelievably, it's been a month. So we have seen some stuff. What have you been up to, Sarah? What have you seen of the horror-ish nature in the last month?
I have watched another one of your recommendations. I feel bad for leaving it as long as I have, but I finally watched one that you have raved about called Relic.
Oh wow, yes, really? Yep. Tell me
Yes, I
more.
finally watched it. But yeah, no, I agree with you. It's amazing. It's so intense. It's like really, really atmospheric. There's some
Yeah.
great symbolism and some great like metaphors and stuff going on with it. And it's really, really well acted by an amazing female cast as well.
Yes.
It's so
It's
good, so sympathetic. You feel, yeah, like you feel like you can relate to all three of them.
yeah. It
And
really is, isn't it?
the house itself is incredibly creepy. I mean, the ending was weird,
Yeah.
but really just kind of emotional as well. You just wanted to just, I don't know, just grab someone and hug them by the end of it. It was one of those. That's how I felt.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. I thought it was totally heartbreaking. Um, I thought it worked really well, as you said, as a bad house horror film with the
Hmm.
creepiness and with the disorientation. And the ending does go into, I suppose, a different kind of horror, but again, it's really about the emotional impact, and I suppose in this case, it's a physical
Mm,
manifestation of the terrible illness that this woman has.
mm,
Um, yeah, I thought it was totally shattering. It somehow there's a few films by, like you said, with a great female cast and a female directors. Things like Saint Maud and Relic last
hmm,
year
hmm,
that
hmm.
came out that are all about real life illnesses, but work really well as horror films as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I hope this one doesn't kind of get forgotten because I'm hearing there's quite a few like things coming into the mainstream that I've heard on Radio 4 because I'm old, I listen to Radio 4. There's a few films that are coming out more in the mainstream about the same subject,
yeah, there is. Yeah,
which sound kind of similar, but I hope this one doesn't get lost in that. People need to watch this one as well.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the problem. I know that the good thing is this one did get some attention. Like, interestingly, the over in the UK, if you're not from the UK listening to this, one of our biggest critics is Mark Commode, has been for decades,
Mm.
and he has a big radio show podcast thing, and he actually made Relic his film of the year last year. And
Oh, cool.
when The Father came out, which is the big movie with Anthony Hopkins playing
Hmm.
again a dementia sufferer. Um, he didn't. So for some reason, the father left him cold. Although a lot of people raved about it, Mark Commode, I think it's his mum that has recently died of Alzheimer's, so he has
Oh,
a real
okay.
connection to it. But the
Mm.
father left him cold, whereas a lot of people loved
Okay.
it. But Relic really, really impacted him. So that's
Right.
quite interesting, and I think people like him raving about it will make a big
Yeah.
difference for Relic. But you're right, the
Mm.
father got loads more attention.
Mm.
um, there's a film with
I've
Lance
not seen
Henriksen,
it.
I think, called Falling. I think with directed by Viggo Mortensen and starring him as well. But Lance Henriksen is his dad, and I think he's got Alzheimer's in that film as well. So yeah, there's a few.
Mm. Yeah, no, it was really good. Great recommend. Really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I love Relic.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The rest of the stuff I've seen is, funnily enough, quite zombie. I've watched. It's a surprise, isn't it? I watched on Netflix Ashen of the North. So it's a spin-off from the Kingdom series. If people have been watching that, it's a feature-length movie rather than a series, and it's kind of a prequel to the series. Standalone, you don't actually necessarily have to know anything about it to understand the film. It's kind of a revenge movie as such, but she discovers basically in the kingdom the zombies are kind of created from a resurrection flower. You're not entirely sure if it's the plant or what has been laid on the plant by some insect that kind of brings people back
Mm.
from the dead to then infect other people and stuff. And it's basically a young girl and her village is attacked. She discovers the flower and gets revenge for the death of her family and stuff. It was really good. Yep, another kind of zombie tiger in there as well, which is
Oh,
always
they're all the
cool. Always,
rage.
yeah, zombie tigers are all the rage.
Wow.
Yeah, they're getting that in there. Pretty good CGI. It's overdubbed rather than subtitled, which some people find very annoying. I think
Yeah.
with like Korean movies and Chinese movies is actually quite funny.
It does change things a bit, doesn't it? It
It
adds a
does
different
change things.
dimension.
Yeah, yeah. You kind of can't take it quite seriously, but no, that was a good little movie. I enjoyed that. Anything to do with
Sorry, what was it
Kingdom.
called?
It's called Ashen of the North.
It's one of those titles I'll never ever remember because it's so
No.
tricky for me to remember. It's my brain. But I didn't see Kingdom either. But you said it works as a standalone, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it sure does. You don't have to know anything about Kingdom to watch that. Like I say, it's prequel, so it's set before that was based anyway, so
Got it.
none of the same characters are in there or anything.
Cool.
But no, that's a cool little zombie one. And then another little zombie one that's turned up is Soldiers or Zombies, or SOV. It's, oh, hang on, I'm going to have to, sorry, I should have had this up on my phone. I'm going to have to Google it first. I can't remember what it is. I think it's Mexican. Hang on. Yeah, it's about
Excellent
kind of gang.
movie.
Yes. Yep, they're all in it. Yeah, it's about a bunch of narco kingpins and stuff. A guy's held in a prison and he escapes, and the soldiers sent to find him, get infected by not a zombie tiger this time, zombie micro pigs.
Say what?
I know, right? There's like a little side plot going on with this crazy, very obnoxious scientist guy that's trying to create the super soldier type thing, you know, the ultimate fighting machine, blah, 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 like they like to do. And he's experimenting on micro pigs.
Wow.
And he thinks that his virus has not worked, and he just has a pile of like dead micro pigs, and he tells someone to get rid of them, and they just dump them in a like junkyard, and they reanimate, get into the sewers, bite all the soldiers, and yeah.
Wow.
the zombie micro pigs are cool. It's not had a great deal of love. Some people don't like it very much, but I actually find it quite amusing. A little bit heartfelt. You know, the guy who escaped from prison has a big family, and he has his little son that he's trying to protect and stuff. That's quite sweet. I think I've still got one episode to watch though.
Wow.
But I've enjoyed it. I think it's quite a lot of fun.
That does sound quite fun, actually. Has there been many
Yeah.
Mexican zombie movies? I know there's some really good Mexican horror films, but I can't think of any recent Mexican horror zombie movies, rather.
Zombie movies? No, I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of. Definitely not in that kind of vein. But yeah, it's cool. It's got some good effects. They are the quick zombies, but they look really awesome, and they have some crazy moves and some crazy noises.
And the micro pigs. That's got to be a first, right?
You've just got to watch it for the micro pigs. Yeah, exactly. At least they're thinking outside the box. They're going away from already violent creatures to something that you wouldn't expect. They're a really cute little micro pig.
Talking of things you wouldn't expect, I still haven't watched it, but every time, well, I say every time, but sometimes when I look through my my Amazon Prime list, which is obviously this huge collection of films I'll never get around to watching, I noticed that still on there, still not watched, is Llamageddon.
That came up on mine the other day. Oh, you've watched this, you might like this. And I actually took a picture and I went, you know what, I think I would like this. Llamas from outer space come and attack some college
Amazon.
kids. Yeah. Yeah.
It does know, doesn't it? Good old Amazon. It's been watching us. It knows exactly what's up our street.
It knows exactly what we'd like, and we'd like Llamageddon.
But like, do you know what I think?
You've got to be in the mood.
The only thing I can assume has happened that Jeff Bezos himself caught me while I wasn't realizing he was watching me. Caught me watching Carousel a few months ago, and he was like, "Hang on a minute, Llamageddon, sir."
Yeah, this is what you need to watch next. But there is a Carousel 2, isn't there?
Yes,
in the making. You know, I sent you a link to the trailer.
You did. You know what? Not many things are as great as Carousel, which truly made me laugh loads, and I thought was absolutely brilliant. And you have to see it to believe it, and indeed enjoy it. But the fact that there's a Carousel 2, I think everything's going to be all right. If that's going to exist.
The one thing we needed was a second part to that wonderful story.
It's so funny. Oh,
it's great.
But
great.
Yes.
Yeah, apart from that, I think I'm almost there. Oh, I did watch another, I think it was on Prime, yes, which I think is on your list as well, called Shadow in the Cloud.
Yes.
That is just totally crazy. It's something that you wouldn't think of. I don't quite know how anyone actually ever thought of it in the first place, but it just goes crazy, especially for something set in, was it World War One?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nuts about it. Well, unfortunately, it's not about a gremlin as much as I would have hoped, but there is like a creature that they call a gremlin, which is on this World War One plane and is slowly attacking it, whilst they're also attacking the Japanese. And oh yeah, it's hard to explain, isn't it, Stephen? You might be able to explain it better.
It is, yeah, because she's like she's a British officer, isn't she? And
She says she is, yeah.
well, yes, exactly. There's a kind of few twists and turns, but I quite like actually. I mean, the first half is actually quite tense and quite.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say serious, but it is more serious than what happens later because it is covering the. You don't really think about it. I mean, the role that is Chloe. Oh, what's her name? Chloe Grace Moretz is the star, and she, as we said, she appears to be this British, obviously female officer, and it kind of reminds you that yes, women had this role in the war, and yes, the sexism they must have encountered would have been off the chart, which is what the film is about, at least for about half an hour, is about this bunch of leery guys that haven't seen a woman for ages and obviously are quite patronizing to her, to say the least. And then and it goes through a thing, at least initially it's kind of this Twilight Zone episode. There's an old Twilight Zone episode with a gremlin on the wing of a plane. In the old version, the guy is played by William Shatner, and in the 80s one, it's John Lithgow. And you're not sure if the guy's paranoid or if there really is a gremlin on the plane, on the wing, rather. And so I was thinking, oh, wow, this is like a remake of that. And it's quite tense, and it's quite good with the dynamic between her. What's she stuck in? What's that bit she's stuck in on the plane? And she's talking to them over the radio, isn't she?
Yeah,
Is it
it's like the bottom turret
cargo
type.
Oh, yeah.
The bottom gun turret type thing, which reminded me loads
That's
of
it.
Memphis Belle.
Yes, I haven't thought about that for a while. Yeah, so that's quite good, and the tension's really good, and it helps that there's this character thing. Chloe Grace Moretz is a really good actress. We've talked about her, or I've moaned about her for being terrible. Well, not terrible, but for being miscast in the Carrie remake. But apart from Carrie remake, she's actually really good in those things. Kick-Ass, of course, when she was quite young. But then, as you said, it jumps the gremlin or jumps the shark, and well, you have to see it to believe it. There's a moment, I think we messaged each other at the time, but there's a moment where you're like, wow, okay, oh, what? No.
Yeah. There's no way that would ever
happen.
Yeah,
once
so many
that
of them.
happens, you realise that the movie has gone off on one and is, certain people in the cast are very safe and some will obviously be mauled.
Yeah, absolutely. And the soundtrack is a little bit ambitious, really. Is a little very, very modern as well.
But it's very synthy, isn't it, the soundtrack from memory? Which I quite like, but again, not really fit with the setting.
No.
I think it's an interesting film. I mean, it's I looked into it a bit, and because I saw that Max Landis was one of the writers. He's still credited, but Max Landis, who's John Landis' son, got into huge trouble, and as effectively, I think his career is possibly somewhat ruined due to some terrible accusations about his behaviour and stuff. But from the looks of it, he wrote the script, and the female director, whose name I don't know, I've forgotten, but she took it over and she rewrote it. So it's quite interesting that a film about sexism was actually written by this guy and transformed into this very talented indie filmmaker's own kind of vision of it, but it's still totally bonkers and silly, as well as being about quite a serious subject. It's kind of a massive mixed bag of stuff, isn't it, really? But the one thing it is, and it's only like 80 minutes long, it's very short, the one thing it is it's never boring.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah.
And at this stage, when films have got really long, I think that's to its credit that it kind of knows what it is. It's in an hour and 20 minutes or something, and it doesn't really ever pause for breath, even when you're going, oh, what? it's still kind of fun.
It's very entertaining, yeah, for sure.
And hats off to her, Chloe Grace Moretz. Even in a moment where you think, wow, you got to admire her in this scene. Hats off to her for kind of actually bringing in a real character
through it. Yeah, trying to make it believable. Absolutely.
Because it's an important. Yeah. So good old Chloe. Well done.
Well done to her for sure. Yeah, no, it's great. You've got to see it to believe it. Like you say, it's short. It's fun, it's entertaining, and at the end of it, you'll be like, what? I think the greatest oh my God, the best follow-up to Shadow in the Clouds would be Llamageddon.
Llamageddon, yeah, you do a double bill.
Double bill, for sure.
We're going to have to watch Llamageddon and have it on next time.
Yeah, next time. That's on one of our recently sings.
But yeah, I would always recommend Shadow in the Cloud. I think it's a good time. It's not necessarily the film you think it will be when you watch the first half an hour, but there we
definitely
go.
not.
Was there any more recently seen from yourself, Sarah?
That is it for me.
Oh,
I am done.
That's absolutely fine. So I'll briefly run through mine. I've seen a few bits of stuff. One of them was Shadow in the Cloud. I watched a couple of new films recently. One is called Eye Without a Face, which is, I think it's just out this week on streaming-ish, I think, or some way you can watch it. And it's actually quite good. It's not to be confused with the 50s movie, which is called Eyes Without a Face. This is Eye Without a Face, so I guess the title is a kind of pun on that. But it's quite an interesting film. It's a bit like a modern Rear Window, if you've seen the Hitchcock film, which has already been kind of semi-remade with things like Disturbia. This is about an agoraphobic guy. Most of the film happens in his apartment, so it feels very relevant for our kind of lockdown world. He never goes out, and he's a good guy. He's a nice guy. He's had an awful, abusive childhood, but he has hacked into a bunch of cameras of ladies, and his routine is pretty much watching them without them knowing, watching their kind of everyday lives, But he's not a pervert, which is interesting. The film could have easily, we've seen lots of films like this where the main character is a total pervert, and indeed is a murderer usually as well. But he's actually watching them just to really, in a perverse way, keep himself company, but to watch over them. He thinks of himself as a guardian angel for these women, and he's not getting off on the images of them getting undressed. He's really more likely to be outraged that their boyfriends are being mean to them. So that's quite interesting. And much of the film, you're watching his multiple screen, which again, in our kind of COVID age, is quite a familiar image to us on a Zoom call or whatever. But you're watching him watching 6 or so screens of these women. And the main thrust of the plot is that he happens to gradually think that one of the women is actually a serial killer. And the more it goes on, the more he and us as the audience kind of think he's probably right. The signs are all there that she might be poisoning blokes. So it's quite an interesting kind of gender reversal, because he gradually becomes under threat, whether she's a serial killer or not. As the plot goes on, you realise that he's kind of under threat, but you're also unsure as to his state of mind, because he's a very troubled young man. It's actually really good. It's you're never quite sure where it's going. The actor's very good in the lead role, tough lead role. Claustrophobic because it's mostly in one room. Really well acted. He has a really funny, cocky, kind of typical laddish Australian or New Zealand, I can't remember, best friend who is the other main character in the film, and he brings some comedy to it. But it's really tense, and as I said, it's quite a good spin on something where it's man in peril, sort of, and it's not your typical pervert watching webcams horror stalker thriller, which you kind of think it might be at the start. So yeah, Eye Without a Face.
That's cool.
Is a recommend. Another one, which is a new film, which I believe is showing at Fright Fest in London, which by the time this episode goes live, Fright Fest will actually be happening, because it's next weekend.
It's going to be soon, yeah.
This is a goodie too. This is called Sound of Violence, which is, I think, quite a nice pun on Simon Garfunkel's Sound of Silence. And it's cool. It's about a deaf girl who, when she's about 10 or something, her dad's got PTSD from the war, I guess from Afghanistan. He goes apeshit and kills her family, and she steps in and kind of attacks him. This is in the first few minutes. And as a result of committing this act of violence herself, she actually is somehow, the trauma and everything is cured of her deafness, so she gets her hearing back. But 10 or so years later, when she's a student, she starts losing her hearing again, and it's fracturing randomly, and she realizes that one way she might be able to get it back, yes, you guessed it, is to commit an act of violence. So So she kind of becomes unintentionally, really, a serial killer and she starts experimenting with sound because her gift and her interest is in music and is in experimenting with sounds and devices and instruments and whatnot. So she's killing people while experimenting with sound waves, and she recovers her hearing, but of course she's also racking up a body count. So this movie is quite interesting. I mean, the bad thing about it's got a really boring subplot with the police, cops on the case kind of thing, which is like, oh, I'm not interested in that, because the main stuff is the lead character. Again, it's a really good female lead character, and it's quite inventive. Like, without spoiling it too much, there's a great scene in an art gallery which plays a bit like a Saw movie sequence, and it involves a harp. So I've never seen a harp used in a horror movie in this kind of way before, and it's spectacular. And again, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a fantastic scene near the end on a beach involving to say even what it was would spoil it. But there's a great payoff for one of the characters. So it's not perfect, and it does have a few bits where you're like, let's get back to the main action, shall we? But it's well acted, and some of the visuals are really impressive, and it's pretty gory as well. There is some proper gory kills in there, but it's just a very interesting take on, I suppose, a slasher movie style plot with some very, very elaborate Saw-ish deaths.
Nice.
So Sound of Violence, definitely check it out.
I'm writing it down now.
Very good looking film as well.
What was that
stylish. This was actually a screener I got sent.
Oh, okay. It might be around soon. Keep an eye out.
I think it's out. I looked at Fright Fest. I've got a feeling it might be on streaming quite soon after Fright Fest, if not very soon. So it's going to be out there. It's actually, you know what? It's based. I think we covered this on the Horror Screams website. It's based on a short film by the same writer-director called Conductor, and so I mean, check out Conductor. I think it's like 7 minutes or something, and it's probably on YouTube. But Conductor, from memory, was fantastic, and Conductor is basically a 7-minute version of what The Sound of Violence is. It revolves around one such sequence of like, oh blimey, killing. Yeah, very very good. Whew. So it's been a month of good stuff. I did also, because I had to, I watched Sharknado 6.
Oh, you lucky thing, you.
The last Sharknado, they say.
Thank God.
And I think it will be, because no one's talking about them anymore. They really lost it, didn't they?
They did.
So yeah, I mean, I always thought I always had a bit of time for Sharknado films, and the first 2 and 3 maybe.
3 is really. I love 3.
Yeah, 3 maybe is better than 2, right? From memory.
Yeah,
3 goes
I think
all out.
so. Yeah. It has the whole like Frankie Muniz losing limbs left, right, and centre. Freaking brilliant. They were good. They were good films. Like you say, the first fun. 3, fantastic, absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, I think so. And I always had a lot of time for Ian Ziering. I always thought, and even in this, actually, you still kind of got to hand it to him. He's still pretty good, considering he's got nothing really to work with. And I always had a lot of time for some of the supporting cast, but this one is excruciating, painful. Yeah, it's not just bad, because the films are knowingly bad anyway, but it's just not funny. It's just not even trying. It was embarrassing to watch, actually, even though I was on my own. I was embarrassed for myself.
Yes, it's like no one walks in and sees me watching this.
So ashamed. I mean, it says a lot that someone as boring as LaToya Jackson appearing as, I think she plays Cleopatra for about 3 seconds of screen time. Even LaToya Jackson isn't the worst thing about it. That's how bad the last Sharknado is. Yep. So that was that. And
that one.
I spent a lot. The final thing, actually, I spent a lot of this month, or this past month, because there's a Blu-ray set out that I got, watching the 1980s Hammer House of Horror TV series.
Oh, cool.
Which is really good, and I'd really recommend it. I mean, strangely, although this doesn't seem that old for me, this is like 40 years old now, but it was something that in the UK, I would have been too young to watch it when it came out, but definitely it used to be repeated on ITV during the 80s. There's 13 episodes, I think it is. and they're all modern day. So although it's Hammer House of Horror is the title, it's kind of technically it's Hammerish. Like from what I can understand, Hammer, the film company that made all the classic horror films, went bankrupt in the late 70s, so it was all over for them. But something to do with key producers needing to keep hold of the Hammer brand, they made the TV series to kind of basically pay off some debts and to keep the company name alive. I think that's the gist of it. So they made Hammer House of Horror, which has some kind of references, brief references, and some actors and some directors from the Hammer horror films, but otherwise it has no connection to them. It's just 13 different modern horror stories, basically. And some of them are really good. You know, there's a werewolf one that's kind of fun and a bit silly, but you know, it works really well. And the great thing
That's
is,
what we like about werewolf ones.
yes,
They've got to
yeah,
have a sense of humour.
I think so. It's called Children of the Full Moon, and it's got Diana Dawes in it, and it has fun with it. But a lot of most of the episodes have really downbeat endings. You're like, wow, you know, for a TV. This was shown at 9 o'clock at night, you know, on a Sunday, I think, back in the 80s. And you know, people would have been watching, I don't know, Dempsey and Makepeace beforehand, or Wheel of Fortune, I don't know. But you got to think of that context, like, wow, this is quite gruesome, actually. There are a couple that are scarring episodes where, you know, they never left my brain because they are, if you watch them, especially if you watch them as a child, they're genuinely frightening. Like there's one called The Two Faces of Evil, where a nice British middle class family on a country lane, all of these things are set near High Wycombe or something. They're driving around and they pick up a hitchhiker in a rain slicker, in this bright yellow rain slicker, and that's the image you remember. And something happens, and you gradually get the notion that he's a doppelganger of the dad. He's somehow taken the identity of the dad, and the only thing different between them is that the hitchhiker has a very disturbing long little fingernail, fingernail on his
Right.
little finger, which is very disturbing.
Creepy.
Yeah, and it goes from there. But the thing you mostly remember is this evil double of your dad in a rain slicker with a long fingernail, like. And that's genuinely disturbing. It has a really downbeat ending as well. And there's a few other episodes. There's one called The House That Bled to Death, which was made. These things were made very soon after the Amityville Horror, and it's very similar to that. It's a family that moves into an apparently haunted house. There's a big twist at the end, which is very, very dark, involving children and or a child. And you can't believe they went there on a 9 o'clock show in 1980. But there's also a great sequence where, at the point where you think the house is haunted, and it goes on for ages. Like it's a party, it's a birthday party for the main child in the episode, and there's loads of scenes of kids like having cake and all that stuff, and suddenly the pipes burst from above the table, and they're all showered in blood and gore.
Oh, nice!
Just the most astonishing moment, because it goes on for a long time. You're like, what?
It goes all Evil Dead.
It does, yes. And so, yeah, I mean, there's other great episodes. There's a lot of familiar faces, like Peter Cushing is in one. There's a very young Brian Cox, not that Brian Cox, the Brian Cox, the actor, because that would be weird. There's a very young and dishy Pierce Brosnan and people like that. There's a total twatty Simon McCorkindale who plays like the most obnoxious British man of all time. But yeah, Hammer House of Horror TV series is actually really good. There's a couple of totally duff episodes, but it's a great combination of genuine scares and horror and gore, terrible 80s wallpaper, you know, all the stuff you'd expect. And it kind of also shows, I think, which is quite interesting, shows how grim and glum England looks in the 80s. Like, wow, yeah, must have been a depressing place to live. So yeah, check it out.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So that was a recent purchase, was it?
Yes, that was a recent purchase. Yeah, there's it's been out in England, but they brought out, there's a really good Australian company called Imprint that are doing some beautiful special editions of stuff like this, and their version of it has a lot more extras. So the Hammer House of Horror series released by them has some really funny audio commentaries by people like Mark Gatiss, and Kim Newman turns up, as he tends to. But the ones with Mark Gatiss, or Gatiss, however you say it, are really funny because he remembers watching it when it came out, and it's a proper reflection on this show that a lot of us watched as kids and were disturbed by it, and still is kind of disturbing at times. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was recently seen, Sarah.
Nice.
Yeah, pretty good, hey?
Yeah, all good.
Ah, well, I think it's time to go on to our main attraction, which is
Yes.
reflecting on the 1990s. 90s horror, obviously, in particular. And we've got our own top 10, so we'll be going through those one by one to kind of see how we've whittled down what we think are the 10 best horror films of the 90s. But it was a challenge. I think you'll agree.
It was, yes.
Um, this was a strange decade. I mean, we'll talk a bit more in a second, but for horror, it was a strange decade. I mean, as we said before, it's the one before things really started to change. So certainly the early days of the internet played a huge part in a couple of films at the end of the decade, especially the Blair Witch Project, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But
Mm.
otherwise, this is the pre-internet age. It's pre-mobile phone age, although there's some mobile phones of an archaic nature in Scream. Um,
Uh,
it's a decade where it was kind of the end of franchises like Jason and Freddy, but they did have a few more entries. Um, a lot of things turned to horror comedy, so Chucky was brought back, but now it was more about playing for laughs than the more serious early ones. Loads of serial killer films. Teen slashers made a comeback. Stephen King films were still many of them. I think it's notable that in the 90s, Italian horror pretty much died a death, as it
mm.
had by the end of the 80s, with a couple of exceptions. And British horror was especially dead. Very few British horror films of note. A lot of remakes started to sneak in. I mean, the early 2000s were very much about remakes, but we had a lot of remakes in the 90s as well. Things like Dracula came back. And by the end of the decade, different trends were emerging. Like there were more monster movies by the end of the
Yeah.
decade, some sci-fi horror crossovers like Species and things like that. And by 99-ish, we got back to more things like ghost stories and spooky, non-gory tales of horror. But yeah, so a very diverse decade. But Sarah, so the 90s, what do you apart from obviously the horror that we're going to talk about, what do you associate with the 90s? What did the decade kind of mean to you, and you were up to? What was the 90s all about for you?
The 90s was my decade, to be fair. I was born in 1980.
Hmm.
So, 1990 hits, I become 10 years old. I start actually figuring stuff out for myself. Horror had always been around, but I was a very scared child. So there was a lot of horror that I was scared of, and I wouldn't want to like revisit it. But I slowly started like creeping back to it. But grew up like in the 90s, so everything was just new and amazing every time. Oh my god, I've never said, oh my god, I love this band more than I ever did in the 1990s,
Yeah.
because just discovering all the music and stuff was my thing. I kind of went through so many different stages, and I finally found like my kind of niche in the 90s of what I had to listen to, and rediscovering like Slayer and Creator and Metallica and stuff like that. I was a very musical kid in
Hmm.
the early 90s. I went to my very first gig, 1994, the
Wow.
UEA in Norwich. The Wild Hearts were my first love of, like, they were a rock band, a kind of 90s Britpop rock band, but loving them as much as I do, I must have seen them over the years. I've probably seen them, god, 30-40 times.
Wow.
Them alone. And that's pretty much how I spent like the mid to end of the 90s, like my early teens to late teens, basically just going out to gigs, playing music with bands. I was in a band myself. Went to college, studied music. We were in punk bands. I went from metal, like Korn, Marilyn Manson, System of a Down, Slayer, and
Hmm.
all that lot. I then kind of transitioned into a bit of a punk kid. I became a skate punk.
Yeah.
I went for Propaganda, NoFX, Lagwagon, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it was crazy times, but really, really good times. And yeah, we were out pretty much every night to a gig if we weren't rehearsing with our own band or just sitting listening to music and just hanging out. It was cool. How about you?
That's fantastic. Yeah, yeah. I was less the gigs person. I wasn't really the gigs person at all, and actually to this day haven't been to I don't think I've been to 30 in total, and you went to see 30
Really?
times the one band,
The same
which
band,
is
yeah.
slightly embarrassing. But it's
For
just
you
the
or
way
for me?
exactly, just the way it turned out. Um, it's strange, really. In a way, I wished I'd kind of missed out there, but I was doing other things, I suppose. I mean, I was a stereotype in the sense I was hanging around with a lot of odd people and goths, especially sometimes literally in graveyards with part of my fringe
Nice.
over one eye. Um,
Yes.
that stuff was
Definitely.
me. I was weirdly, and this continues to this day, I was weirdly still listening to 80s pop while also hoovering up Danzig and White Zombie and Marilyn, early Marilyn. I think it Smells Like Children, the early album, or one of them.
Mhm.
So I was doing that. It was the first decade where, a bit like you, actually, I was born in '78, so I'm a bit older.
Little
Um,
world.
so I was now old enough to see horror at the cinema at a certain point. So there's a small cinema in Durham near where I still live. I haven't gone far. Um,
Mm.
which was run by an old couple, and they were kind of letting me in to see 18 films when I was about 15 or 16, which is quite nice actually. So I saw some of the
That's cool.
earliest 18 stuff I saw was things like Pulp Fiction, Interview with the Vampire, The Crow. I remember
Oh
seeing The Crow
yes.
at the cinema. I was mad for The Crow. The
Oh.
Crow launched a lot of things for me, especially a love of Nine Inch Nails. I think was maybe the
Mhm.
biggest one. So I kind of discovered them, and indeed, I suppose quite a bit of the music came from films because I was spending a lot of time
Yeah.
watching films. Um, I was obsessed with Twin Peaks on TV, and then the X Files. They were things I was like, wow, and befriended people because of that love. At the time, some of that was through pen pals. So you'd have to physically write to
Oh
people
yes.
that
Yeah,
you'd
I had
find.
pen pals.
Yes, that was a big thing. Now, of course, that's I guess that's kind of gone, which is a bit of a shame. But
Mm.
but at a certain stage as well, and it would have been when I was 18, so 96-ish. I started going to horror festivals. So that was kind of a revelation. I think the first one I went to, in fact, I'm sure it was Eurofest um, in London. Can't remember where actually, but it was definitely in London. And I'd started writing. I started getting published in the early '90s. So I think I was 14 when I first had my probably totally shit piece of writing published. But I was really happy at the time, of course.
Yeah,
Um, and one of the guys
that's an
I
achievement.
wrote for invited me to that first festival of Eurofest, which was a trip to London for the first time on my own. Uh, and I had to find my way to Kent, I think, to go and stay at his house. And it was showing movies like the '70s movie Vampires. I got a feeling Cannibal Holocaust was showing.
Oh wow.
Um,
Amazing.
there was a '70s film called Violent Naples, which we hilariously called Violent Nipples.
Of
Um,
course.
there was a film called Island of Death where somebody has sex with a goat showing. So yeah, there was all this stuff going. And then you'd bump into people like Eileen Daly, who at the time was the very exotic model for Redemption, the video company. So she was there, and Norman J. Warren was there. So that became a real thing for me. It became a thing where I'd go to film fairs and horror film festivals. Um, I met one of my best friends of all time at university called Wednesday. Yes, that was her real name. Well, she changed it. She was originally called Claire, which is obviously more boring. And so we hung out a lot in the late '90s, and we went to probably the best horror festival I ever went to, which was Cine Excess. Again, actually, that was in Welland Garden City, um, where Gunnar Hansen and David Hess were there. And
Nice.
we were lucky enough to spend quite a lot of time hanging around with them. And David Hess
Cool.
mostly wasn't talking about films; he was mostly just playing his guitar. Um, Gunnar Hansen was really, really sweet and seemed to fancy her, which was fair enough because he was Gunnar Hansen. But yeah, we slept on a park bench because we hadn't booked a hotel. We are like, oh, we'll find somewhere, and of course we didn't. So we just slept rough. But yeah, that stuff was great.
That is
Absolutely
what you
fantastic.
did in the 90s.
Yeah, I had my own. Wednesday and I we filmed at uni. We formed our own film club called the Cult Film Society, and we were touting for business. We were getting people signed up as members where they'd pay, I don't know, £3 for the year or something like that. And
Nice.
at least initially, we were on a mission to kind of do the best thing we could. So we had quizzes and things like that, but we managed to rent actual 35mm prints of Nightmare on Elm Street and Candyman, I think it was.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and on Halloween night, we showed those two films in the big lecture theatre, and we had about something like 300 people, uh,
Wow.
300 members or whatever it was, turning up for it.
Yeah.
fantastic. We both had stage fright, but we were on the stage kind of introducing and stuff, shitting bricks.
Yep.
And then from there, we showed, at the time, we showed what I suppose were then banned films like A Clockwork Orange in lecture theatres and pretended we were showing something else so we didn't get in trouble. But yeah, the 90s, there was a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, it was a massively important time.
Yeah,
Great fun,
crazy
actually.
time. Yeah, it's like when you were off to like film festivals and stuff. That's when me and my friends were decided we were going to go, because we just go to the odd gig in London or wherever we could. And we then decided we would start doing some festivals. I think we missed out on the Phoenix Festival, but we started doing Reading.
Oh.
And from then on, we did that every year. It was kind of like a annual occurrence for the next 10 years.
Yes. Yeah. I suppose it was later that I started going to gigs to some degree. I know I saw the Misfits in Norwich, and I got really into. I suppose it would have been the early 2000s where I got really into the symphonic metal, like Nightwish and things like that, and made it a mission to go and see them. But yeah, man,
it was also much cheaper in those days, wasn't it? You know, you really affordable. To go to a gig, it was what, about a tenner?
It was. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
T-shirts were a fiver, hoodies were a tenner. You know, you still have money for a couple of drinks.
Yes. Yeah, it was ridiculously cheap. Same for the Horror Fest. I think I've still kept some of the tickets where it's like 20 pounds for what?
Yeah, and you could probably just turn up on the day and go, "Hello, have you got any tickets left?"
Yeah, and
whereas
that.
Whereas now they sell out just like that, or touts are like then selling them on for double the price.
It was really different as well. I think I don't know if gigs are affected in this way, but certainly the film festivals felt different. Like now it seems everybody's an expert because they're behind the keyboards and everything. But back then it felt a bit more special because we weren't just staring into our phones. Everybody would kind of have a chat with each other, and it was a bit more of an intimate gathering. I think at some of the horror fests. It was quite a special time, I think.
Good times.
Great times. Yes. Yes, indeed. And it was the times as well, the 90s, of course, the first time, I suppose, I was actually, and people generally were more able to own films. Before it was a case of wait till Jaws 3 was on TV again and then watch it. But the 90s was videos, obviously, for a while, but ultimately it was DVDs, and then it became much more accessible to actually keep.
It's kind of like finding stuff out for yourself as well, wasn't it? I mean, there's so many like things like MTV, that kind of stuff, like Headbangers Ball, Kerrang, and stuff like that. I was obsessed with Ren and Stimpy.
Yes, yeah, sure, yeah.
Loved that show. Red Dwarf, Bottom, all that kind of stuff. Because horror movies and stuff, I would watch horror movies, but because I was so out and about doing other stuff, I think I kind of ended up just watching little bits here and there. So I kind of stuck with series and stuff.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And I think the key thing maybe was, as again, it's part of just being older, I suppose, as you did in the 90s rather. But you realise, wow, there's some people that like this stuff too. Because I know that was the case with Cradle of Filth, who I was really obsessed with. I suppose that would have been mid-90s. It must have been the early stuff, Midian and things like that. But I remember befriending someone that really loved them that lived in Fakenham where I was growing up. I thought, well, I was obviously the only person in Norfolk that liked Cradle of Filth. But then she said, oh, I really like Cradle of Filth. Really?
Yeah.
And we'd just meet up just to talk about Cradle of Filth and swap CDs. There wasn't really much else going on. We don't think I ever found out much else about her, but we just know that. Do you want to talk about Cradle of Filth next Sunday at 7? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's do it. Excellent.
And that's a kind of microcosm of the bigger picture, because of course, the more you went to festivals or gigs and whatever, you'd meet other people that, well, you really like this too. I thought it was the only one.
Yeah.
And that's quite fantastic. And of course, it was pre-internet, so it was even more special. Now you can easily find. Now there's like 12 billion nerds out there, and happy to admit that they're nerds like us. But back then, it was kind of quite special because you had to look for them.
Yeah, because we kind of like hid away.
It's absolutely. Music and film watching is kind of a private thing, and everybody's got their own favorite stuff. But yeah, kindred spirits are all out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, the horror movies, Sarah. It's all about the horror movies, I suppose.
It's all about them.
Yeah.
I did watch enough to cobble together a top 10. Hooray!
Yeah, this was excruciating. Not excruciating like Sharknado 6, but
No,
excruciating to
just
try and
so hard.
get
Yeah,
down to
writing
10.
everything down. Yeah, and just be like, oh God, can't decide.
So we're going to do some honorable mentions of things that didn't make it, because there's a lot of films beyond 10. It's impossible,
Yeah,
but we have got top 10, so we're going to count
yeah.
those down first, one by one, see how they differ or compare, and then try and mention a few others that you're going to be shouting at your radios at your device of choice that we've missed out. What is your number 10, Sarah? 10 probably best horror film of the 90s for you.
Okay, my number 10 is From Dusk Till Dawn,
Oh,
1996.
fantastic.
Brilliant film. That's one that you can. I remember when I first watched it. It is obviously a film of two halves, but you weren't
Yes.
expecting it to go the way it did. Obviously, the second half is crazy, crazy, amazing, and brilliant. But the first half is also kind of cool and very 90s, and it has George Clooney in it, who was
Yes.
yummy.
Yeah. With the neck tattoo as well.
Exactly, and Quentin Tarantino just being a weirdo.
Being a
And Juliette
lech.
Lewis, she was like the 90s girl, wasn't she?
She's great. Do you like her band? Is it Juliet and the Licks? Is that her
Yeah,
band?
it's okay. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I can't say I've listened to an awful lot of it, but yeah, she's out there. She's got a good voice.
She's really quite distinctive, isn't she? And I was always really impressed by her. The first time I saw her was in Cape Fear, which is a really good film as well. And she has that really weird and creepy scene with De Niro, which is so well played by her, especially.
She's just got something about her. She's very quirky. She's very pretty, but she's also incredibly quirky as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And she was around a lot in the 90s, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Um, and the sad thing is, she now plays mum characters. I've seen her in
Yeah.
something as a mum. That's disturbing.
Yeah, that's when you know the 90s was a long time ago.
But From Dusk Till Dawn is great, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
just so much fun.
Yes. And Tom Savini,
Tom
Danny Trejo.
Savini
Yeah.
with the cod piece. Um,
Yes.
who is it? That's the guy outside is Cheech Marin, isn't it?
Yep.
The guy promising all kinds of something. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. um, Danny Trejo. Yeah, I mean it's one of the earliest times I would have seen people like Danny Trejo. Salma Hayek I'd seen in Desperado. She's memorable as Satanico Pandemonium. Is that it?
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
The snake charming performer. Tarantino was a huge presence in the 90s, and this was amazing at the time. It's like, wow, a horror film written by Tarantino. Yeah, it's fantastic. The one thing about From Dusk Till Dawn I always thought that they should have done, which they never would do because it doesn't really work like this for marketing, but I always felt they should never have given the twist away in the trailer, because if you went in just thinking this was a crime film about George Clooney and Tarantino holding up convenience stores and being nasty, and had no idea about the titty twister being a vampire bar, then it would have blown your mind.
Yeah.
But they gave it away in the trailer, unfortunately. But it is fantastic. It's got a great soundtrack. The Tarantino stuff always has great soundtracks, but this one thing. And Tom Savini, yeah. There's some great gore in it, man. There's
Turns into a giant kind of rat creature zombie vampire thing.
He does. There's a hilarious moment where he tries to hide it, doesn't he? Because he's trying to cover up his fangs, but he can't stop the transformation.
Yeah. That's so much fun. What's your number 10?
Well, yeah, torturously, I went through this. So in the end, I've had to do it. I've had to change. I originally had something else, but at number 10, I'm going to have to put Scream.
Oh, okay.
I'd left this out, but then thought, that's ridiculous, Stephen, is what I said to myself, because I do talk to myself. I refer to myself in the third person. Yeah, Scream has to be in there. I do like it a lot. I've watched it too many times, and not wishing to kind of blow a trumpet and stuff, but I wrote a book about it, and as a result, I watched it too many times, and now I don't have any hatred for it, but now I'm kind of and that's a shame.
Now, yeah.
And that's a shame, actually, and that's my own fault. But I have to admit, it's always was fantastic when I watched it. Before I watched it too many times, I saw it in the cinema. It took a while to come to the UK. I think back in the 90s and those days, there was usually a 4-ish month delay between big
Oh,
films that you're excited about coming out in America and then eventually
yeah.
arriving in the UK. And this was one of them. I think it came out about April of '97, and America had it at Christmas the previous year. And it was tremendous. You know, the first sequence, Drew Barrymore being terrorized, is genuinely frightening. It's the one time
Yeah.
I think Scream is truly scary. I don't think anything after that is particularly scary, although it is very good. And at the time as well, it was the great novelty of a slasher film that hit really big and was really popular and was really clever about what it was doing. Before the sequels, I think, kind of ruined it, especially Scream 4, where I wanted Courtney Cox to be decapitated and David Arquette to be disemboweled as soon as possible because they were so annoying. But in the first one, it worked really well. And they were all very good. Nev Campbell as well was very good. But it was just a clever movie. It was great to see Wes Craven getting like another blockbuster hit.
Yeah.
And most importantly, it was really tense. It worked as a whodunit, I think. Whatever happened to Skeet Ulrich? No one knows.
Mm.
And yeah, so I figure it had to be in there. So Scream is my
It does,
number
yeah.
two.
It's like iconic 90s horror movie, isn't it?
Yes, hugely influential. The Craft came before it. The Craft I always thought was perhaps forgotten as being important because it was a huge hit and it kind of did bring teen horror back on its own. But Scream was the one that led to
Yeah.
the urban legend I know we did last summer and a whole spate of teen slasher things before they wore out and became scary movie, you know.
Yeah.
But it is really good, and when you watch it again, you kind of appreciate it. Wes Craven directed it, and obviously the horror stuff's really strong. But if you're looking for a horror film that very, very much represents the 90s, then Scream is
It
obviously
has
the
to
one.
be. Yeah,
But
for
also
sure.
soundtracks as well. They were big, you know. I can't think of the bands now. Creed, I know, in the sequels were a big kind of crossover music video, weren't they? I think Scream 3
Yeah.
has a Creed music video attached to it. This one was Nick Cave, I think I'd heard for the first time in Scream. Red Right Hand is a great track that they use quite a lot. There we go. Yep.
Good
It's
old
got to be there.
Scream. It's got to be in there.
I do like Scream 2. I think Scream 2, definitely the first half, has got some really good things about it. And then I think it does tail off after Scream 2. One day, perhaps we'll talk about them in more depth.
Oh, yeah.
What's your number 9, Sarah, of the 90s?
Okay, number 9. I really wanted my number 9 to be higher up, but the more I thought about it, I couldn't fit it in there. But I absolutely love this film, and I'm pretty sure it's on your list as well, but probably higher up. So we won't go into too much detail about it. But my number 9 is The Blair Witch Project, 1999.
Yes.
It seems really low down on my list, but I love it. I love it so much. I'm not a supernatural person. I'm not a massive fan of supernatural horror and stuff. I find it quite boring. I find it quite but the Blair Witch Project absolutely shat me up.
Excellent.
Loved it so much. That's what then got me into the whole found footage thing.
Yes. Yeah.
2 things really, really well done that, you know, have potential to be incredibly rubbish, but work so well. And yeah, I really love this film. Watch it quite a lot. I don't revisit an awful lot of supernatural stuff, but that is one that I do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely on my list later, so we can go into it more.
Yeah, I thought it would be.
Yeah, I
It
totally
had to be on
agree.
my list, but I wanted it to be higher up, but
It was massive. I mean, it's hard to kind of comprehend now because we're so far down the rabbit hole of viral marketing and the internet and stuff. But in '99, it was such a brilliantly marketed thing. It cost nothing to make. It went down a storm, I think, at the Sundance Film Festival, and it had this huge word of mouth. The IMDb listed the 3 main actors as dead, missing or dead, something like that. The
Yep.
website had all these interviews mourning the death of Heather, Josh, and Mike is the third one.
Yep.
So the marketing was very clever because it was going all out to convince you that this really was found footage.
Yeah.
And this could only work once. This kind of marketing could only work once. And obviously, found footage films after this, there were some awesome ones after this, but there was a lot of terrible ones because obviously, the one thing it did as well is it got anybody that had access to a camera could get their film released.
Yeah, and then everything was just bound to be compared to Blair Witch,
Yeah,
really, after that.
but they did it so well, and
They did it so well.
I'll never forget the trailers. The trailers were terrifying. They showed almost nothing. The trailers mostly, at least in the UK, they did some with shots of the audience looking terrified, which is, I know that's not necessarily the first time that was done, but it was one of the first times I was aware of that kind of marketing being done. But also, it was mostly a shot of that famous shot of Heather filming herself with the snot and
Snot
everything,
coming out of her nose. Yeah.
saying how scared she was and that she knew she was going to die, and that was pretty much it. You had no idea what you had no idea what the witch was. Was there a witch? What was this?
Yeah.
And you had the images of the stick man, which I was that guy that was buying the merchandise just because it had a stick man on it. I think it's outstanding. I think it's a total classic horror film, and seeing it in the cinema in '99, which I did, annoyingly again, with, I think the delay hurt it here. I remember seeing it at the cinema and being annoyed at people that were like, "Oh, that was shit," because there'd been a delay of a few months. I think it came out for Halloween for the UK, but it was a massive hit in America in the summer. So the hype had gone on so long as this being the scariest film ever made that there was no way that people weren't going to be disappointed, because if you have that hype machine playing for so long, unless you realize that these people, they were really killed, then you're not going to achieve the impact that they're expecting. But I thought it was truly frightening, and still do, and that's the test. It holds up on a small screen 20 years later. Yeah, great choice, man. Number 9. Now I want to watch it again. This was hard as well because I do love this film. My number 9 is Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola version, which came out in '92. This was a huge hit. This was a big blockbuster. The studios do this every couple of decades or so. They remake the classic horror novels, Frankenstein, Dracula, most often. And this is the bonkers one. This is a big budget Francis Coppola film with a massive cast, hilariously and sweet actually as well. Is Keanu Reeves playing stuffy Englishman Jonathan Harker, who has to pretend to fight off a trio of bare-breasted vampire brides, and says things like, "I know where the bastard sleeps," which I think is a great line. But yeah, it's totally mental. Anthony Hopkins going way over the top as Van Helsing, totally bonkers in a different film to everyone else. Sadie Frost acting like she's in a porn film, getting ravaged by a wolf. Gary Oldman giving it large.
Oh my god, yeah, he's amazing.
John Lennon spectacles, long hair. Yeah, brilliant. Winona Ryder being quite dull. But the thing is, the roles
trying her best.
She is. I mean, I think it's great casting in a way, because these are the people that were the face of the early '90s. Winona Ryder, Keanu, even Sadie Frost, who I think was actually a really good actress. I think it works really well, and actually the characters played by Keanu and Winona are the most boring people in the book as well. So the fact that these guys at least found something to be entertaining about Mina and Jonathan was good. But the technique is amazing. This was that crucial period in the '90s where CGI hadn't yet taken off properly, except for maybe Terminator 2, and a lot of stuff was still being done practically. And the great thing about Dracula is that Coppola was using loads of old technology to tell the tale. So pretty much the whole thing is trick shots, in camera trickery, lighting tricks, all the stuff that they were doing around the time Dracula was actually first around. So I think that's cool. He went back to the very start of cinema to use a lot of the camera stuff that they had available in the early 20th century. Most of all, it's just a lot of fun. You've got Hopkins cutting off heads a year or so after Silence of the Lambs. But yeah, Bram Stoker's Dracula, great fun. Huge hit.
Yay, that's a really good one. Okay, now on to number 8.
8, yes.
My number 8 is one that went around the schoolyards an awful lot and made you want to say his name several times in the mirror. It's Candyman, 1992.
Awesome.
Just the whole threat of the whole standing in front of the mirror and saying his name. That was what kind of did it. I hadn't seen the movie, and it all went around school. I was like, oh my god, I have to see this. I have to do this, and then I have to see the movie, and then I was like, oh my god, that was really scary. It did really scare me. Yeah, because that was 92, and I
Yes.
think I saw it not long after that, 93, 94.
So you were really young. You were 13-ish?
13, 14,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that shipped me up there.
I
In a
totally
good way. Tony Todd is just best role ever. He was great.
Yeah, he's actually a great actor. It's easy to forget how great he is because he's done some nonsense, because he has to pay the bills like everybody else.
Yeah.
But he really should be a leading man more often. But in this, fantastic.
I'm looking forward to the new version.
I really am. Yeah, I think it's probably in the right hands, and I think the trailer's promising. Yeah, there's no reason why they can't make another great film of Candyman. Candyman's fantastic. I think it's interesting because in the UK we didn't really have. In America, Bloody Mary was a thing, a big urban legend thing, long before Candyman. But we never really had that over here, at least from what I can remember from growing up. So Candyman was the first say his name in the mirror 5 times thing that I can remember knowing. And yeah, it's so well done. And he's such a seductive but terrifying figure. I don't think there's been a monster that is truly both of those things at the same time. Because he's terrifying, but that voice, man, that voice, he seduces the main character. And you totally get it.
Yeah.
It's spellbinding. It's terrifying. What do you think of the ending? Because it's I remember because the ending's kind of there's a few jump scares in Candyman. The ending's a big jump scare with Helen appearing. We can give it away. It's 30, 40 years old.
Many
I
people
always
have seen
like
it.
the ending. Like she comes back, doesn't she? Because
Sure.
her bloke's cheated on her. She's dead at the end of Candyman, but she comes back as the next, I suppose, incarnation of Candyman, really.
Yeah.
And she kind of, I think she guts the girlfriend of her husband, didn't she?
Yeah.
Really like that ending.
Yeah, disturbing.
Yeah. Great actress as well, Virginia Madsen. It's fantastic film. Yeah.
And an early Xander Berkeley as well.
He's great in everything, isn't he?
He is great in everything, isn't he?
Underrated actor, and I think he does sleaze quite well. He's the sleazy teacher in this that's sleeping with his student behind his wife's back, and I think he plays that stuff really well. He's got the face and demeanor for it. Yeah, nice choice. So,
what is your number 8?
Number 8, again, painful process, but I had to include it. Exorcist 3.
Oh, okay.
So this is terrifying as well. This has got 2 of my all-time scariest moments in it, and that's the reason it's in there really. Although the rest of it's pretty good too. So, Exorcist series is obviously a strange one because the first one is, you don't need to say much about the first one. It's established classic, and rightly so. The second one's bonkers. The second one is giant locusts, or James L. Jones wearing a giant locust costume. Richard Burton doing some Richard Burton stuff. Linda Blair's back. We're not sure why or how. And it's totally mental. It's not, it's not intending to be scary. It's just a really weird, trippy, hippie 70s thing that they were like, wow. And no one likes it, but I actually think it's quite cute and funny. Exorcist 3 is an attempt at a direct sequel based on a book by the same guy that wrote the original. And it's very much about getting back to that same kind of tone. And Brad Dourif is a serial killer that somehow seems to be channeling Father Karras, who died in the first one at the end after being possessed by the demon that was in Linda Blair. So I think it's a really good. I mean, Exorcist 3 unfolds as a kind of detective story. George C. Scott's the hero. He's a detective. He's investigating a bunch of weird murders. There's some statues of the Virgin Mary that have been horribly defaced and things like that are going on. And there's a sense that, yes, there's a series of possessions that are at work. And I've chosen it because it's really, really good. It's really creepy all the way through. Brad Dourif, I think it's his best ever role as the inmate. But it's got 2 of the best scares of all time. It really does. So people listening to this will leave, if they've not seen it, obviously it's fair enough. But if you've seen it, you'll know which 2. The first one goes on forever. It's a long shot of a hospital corridor where you're waiting for something to happen for a long time. And it is a long shot. So you see it like a receptionist. And the weird thing about it is you think it's going to be all right because you see a cop walks in and he's sitting down. So, it can't be too bad then. And then after loads of misdirection, this figure walks in. I think it's from stage left. Just randomly walks in with a massive pair of shears, medical shears. Do you call them shears? It's shears if they're medical. They're not the gardening
Yeah,
ones. I suppose they're still shears, right?
I suppose so. We'll
They
go
can
with
still
that.
cut your head off.
Absolutely.
She walks in. It's a nurse, basically, a possessed nurse. But the timing of it is brilliant. Absolutely brilliantly timed. There's never been a better jump scare, and that's the reason The Exorcist 3 is in my top 10. There's another great jump scare. Well, it's not really a jump scare, but there's another great fright later on where the audience sees, but George C. Scott doesn't see, that there's a possessed nurse on the ceiling with the same kind of pair of medical shears.
The shears are back.
And I don't quite know how they did it, but because there was no CGI, but she doesn't quite, but almost does cut his head off with it. And the shot is weird because you think, how does that work? Because you know, and
she's on the ceiling.
And in both cases, again, so this would have been on video, I suppose, about 91, because it came out in the cinemas in 90. So 13-year-old me, you know, practically flying off the chair at 2 moments, shitting my pants, of The Exorcist 3. So the incredible memories. And I've watched it recently and it really holds up. And these days, I think I appreciate it more for the other stuff, because it's quite, you know, it's quite slow, but it's very, very gripping. And very smart, and it's quite witty as well. But those 2 moments, yeah, mental, classic, great moments. Exorcist 3, number 8. What's your number 7, Sarah?
Number 7 for me is The Crow, 1994.
The Crow,
Brandon Lee and the makeup and that was my kind of like, I wanted to be goth after watching The Crow.
He's beautiful.
Definitely. Yes, love that film so much. Because, I mean, it is a horror film, you know, it's about a guy that gets killed and comes back for revenge and stuff, but it's not necessarily scary. It's a love story. It's just a dark love story, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I really went for that kind of time, especially after Candyman.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I wanted something a little bit more low-key on the scare side of things. Something more grim, more dark, but less jump scary and no bees.
Oh, the bees. Yeah. The Crow is great. The Crow, I mean, we've talked about other things. Before the Blair Witch, maybe The Crow, out of all the films that we're talking about, had the biggest preamble of like chatter before it came out, didn't it? Because Brandon Lee had famously died.
Yeah.
The film became huge I don't think it became huge just because of it, but certainly his weird death, which became the subject, like Bruce Lee, actually, the subject of endless theories, but it was just an accident ultimately. Led to it being this much talked about and very, very popular film, because we're all quite kind of ghouls anyway. I'd have gone to see it anyway, but there's a ghoulish side to us that wants to see the last film made by Brandon Lee.
Yeah.
But he's fantastic in it. I mean, that should never be forgotten. He was very charismatic in other stuff, but he is great in The Crow, perfectly cast. It was huge, like you said, in terms of goths in the 90s. There was no other film as big as that. Maybe Nightmare Before Christmas, but this was first.
Oh yeah, it was before.
Great soundtrack.
Yeah, that was one of the ones I wanted to rewatch, because I haven't seen it for a long time. I've definitely seen it before, since it came out. Obviously, I watched it several times when I was a teenager and stuff, but I've definitely not watched it in the last, God, I don't know, 8 or 10 years. Something I need to revisit for sure.
Yeah, I think it holds up.
I have it on DVD. I've got it, but I just haven't watched it.
It's due. It's strange. It's one of those big hits that hasn't really had a massive re-release. It's probably due a big old, Blu-ray.
They keep talking about doing a sequel to it as well, but I kind of in a way don't want it to happen.
Yeah, I don't. Well, yeah. I mean, the sequels that came out were god awful, absolutely terrible, and the TV series was really boring. I watched some of that. God. They totally missed the point. There's a terrible sequel with Edward Furlong. Did you see that one?
No.
Number 4, maybe The Crow, Wicked
Oh God, no.
Prayer.
I think I probably gave up after the second one, to be fair.
The second one's the one with Iggy Pop, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
very bad. And I mean, obviously it was a hit, so they had to follow it, but there was a kind of empty hole where Brandon Lee should have been, and they kind of missed the whole point anyway, the tone of the comic. Did you read the comic book, the graphic novel?
Yeah.
Because they're extraordinary. They're really haunting, and I remember watching the interviews with the creator, Jamie O'Barr, who was this very bitter and depressed man whose girlfriend had been killed by a drunk driver, and he wrote The Crow straight after, and it all became this incredibly powerful, tragic thing. Like you said, kind of horror, but also this doomed love story, and a lot of mental action as well. It's kind of an action-driven film as well.
Ooh.
But yeah, The Crow is great. It didn't make my list, but it was a huge part of the 90s. Yeah, fantastic. And that soundtrack, that's probably one of my most played CDs of all time.
Yeah, most listened to, especially in the 90s.
Yeah, man, tremendous. Number 7. My number 7 is a film that maybe it could have been higher, but Alien 3 basically is my number 7.
Cool.
Which is my favorite of the sequels to Alien.
Yeah.
As much as I do love Aliens, Aliens is a fantastic monster movie. It's one of the greats. There's practical effects in that are unbelievable, especially with the Queen alien at the end. But Alien 3, I remember, again, it's another of those films that I would have watched on video, and it really, really shocked me in terms of how grim it is and how they kill off Ripley at the end. She dives to her death at the end because she's been impregnated by the alien. She's got one growing inside her. It's like, wow, they actually went that far. It's so bleak, it's so bold for a Hollywood sequel. They take the people you love the most from the previous one. In this case, it's obviously Ripley, but it's also Michael Biehn as Hicks and the little kid Newt, who survived the second one. And in the first 5 minutes of Alien 3, they're both dead. Oh, wow. Okay, so it's that film.
It's that kind of a thing.
Unbelievable.
No one's safe.
Exactly, they shave, everybody's got a shaven head, so everybody looks alike, including Ripley, which I always thought was a really bold touch. And Ripley's stuck on this kind of grim penal colony full of kind of threatening British character actors like Ralph Brown from With Nail and I, and Brian Glover, and Charles Dance. And there's a moment where you think, oh, actually, it's not all grim. Charles Dance seems quite nice. He's probably going to be her boyfriend, and he gets killed. He gets killed about half an hour in. You're like, oh, fuck. And it's a movie about Ripley realizing she's going to die. I mean, that's what it is. The alien pops up. I like the fact that it's stripped down. It's stripped down to a single alien again, which I think works really well. And I also love the fact that it's a prison colony and they have no guns. So Aliens, the second one, was very much a war film where everybody had big fuck off guns. And the scary thing about Aliens, I always thought was great, was that everyone's got big fuck off guns, but they're all useless because they're all going to die anyway. Bill Paxton is shouting his mouth off, but easily gets killed when the crunch comes. But in this one, the guns are gone, so they have very limited defense. And it's a pretty scary picture, actually. It's got loads of tension. And there's an alternate version on the DVD which is longer and actually even grimmer in some ways, which is quite different. In the version that came out of the cinema, the alien bursts out of a dog, but in the preferred, I think it's a producer's cut or something weird like that. In the other version, it's from a dead ox. But yeah, Alien 3, I do think, is the best of the sequels. It does go a bit pear-shaped a little bit with Alien Resurrection after that, where they bring her back, and then there's obviously further movies later on, but I do like Alien 3 a huge amount, and 14-year-old me thought it was amazing.
I can imagine. My brother was really into the Alien movies. I quite often forget how good Alien 3 is. That's another one I need to see again.
I think so, yeah. It was underrated at the time, and I think some people hated it possibly because it didn't do the same thing as Aliens. But that's the exact reason I liked it. I thought it was a really brave move. And she's great in it. She is so good in it, and she's very bitter, and she's very, very downbeat like the film because she's lost everything, and she's stuck with a damn alien again. Would you believe it? Would you believe it?
Goddamn aliens.
Yeah, it's fantastic, man. So number 6 for you.
Number 6. My number 6 kind of is a little bit different, but it had to go on my list because I have to watch this and I love it so much. It's Gremlins 2, the new batch from 1990. I love the first Gremlins, but Gremlins 2 is one that I've overwatched Gremlins 2, but I love it so much. I love the whole bit in the skyscraper and the Christmas party and the singing, and it's just so great. I feel bad when I was doing this list, and I feel even worse now, putting Blair Witch Project at number 9 and then Gremlins 2 at number 6. But Gremlins 2 is so much fun.
It is spectacular. Yeah, Gremlins 2 is mental. I would have put it on. Yeah. I should have, but I was thinking. I mean, I don't know. I do think it's one of the great films of the 90s, though.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely mental, isn't it? You can't believe they made
crazy.
That. And again, it's the puppet.
So
it's the real stuff.
Yeah,
no
the
CGI.
puppets. Yeah, exactly. Yep,
Stop
exactly.
motion, but no CGI.
And it's still not that dated. You don't think it's from 1990, like the beginning of the decade. It could be a lot later than that.
Yes.
It's done so well. Apart from the costumes, obviously the costumes, we're still looking like we're in the 80s, but the puppets themselves and the gross stuff that they do, it creeps you out, it grosses you out, it makes you laugh. It has cute little fluffy things that turn into giant monsters.
It does.
It has a bit of everything. Yeah.
It's mental. Gremlins 2 is fantastic. I like the fact that it signs off, because it's total mayhem in Gremlins 2, isn't it? It's the foot's on the pedal. It's out of control, and they've obviously been given a lot of money to do whatever they want because the first one was so good and so successful. I like the fact that this big Hollywood film ends with a bestiality gag where the guy's about to go and shag the female gremlin that's been fluttering her eyelashes all the film. Really? This is a family?
This is a family movie, people.
We know what he's going to do. Yeah. I also like that it brings back the kind of nice, but let's face it, drippy couple from the first one, Billy and Kate. But it doesn't give a shit because they're kind of annoying each other now because they're married.
Yeah.
they've moved to the horrible big city, and they're sidelined because there's so much Gremlin stuff going on. Like you said, the musical numbers, the New York thing.
Yeah.
Mr. Futterman becomes the hero.
Yeah. It's all I think about whenever I hear like New York, New York. I don't think of the original song. I think of Gremlins 2 and the one with the monocle and
what's the guy's name? Donald Clamp or so. It's modelled on Donald Trump, isn't it? The big executive who owns the building and owns most of the city.
Daniel Clamp.
Daniel Clamp, yeah, not to be confused, of course, at all with Donald Trump.
No,
and he's
like
doing, and I like the fact that they're playing old movies, and it's Casablanca now in colour with a happy ending. I think it's genius. I do think it's genius, and I remember I listened to Joe Dante. There's a great podcast actually that he co-hosts called Movies That Made Me, where they get on a guest each week and they talk about movies that influenced them hugely. And Joe Dante often talks about how Gremlins 2 was a big commercial failure. It lost money, possibly by coming out in a summer of loads of other sequels, possibly because they left it too long. There was like a 6-year gap. But he also thinks just because he did whatever he liked, they had the total freedom, because the first one was such a hit, they had total freedom to go as mental as they wanted. And I think maybe it was too bonkers. Maybe it was just too mental. It's also got a gremlin and a shredder, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. There's so many gross, squishy ways for them to die. Just a lot of melting things, and through shredders and all sorts.
Genius, just genius. And and Hulk Hogan pops up. Yeah. Love Gremlins too. Great choice, man. Number 6. Yeah, my number 6. We've already had. My number 6 is Candyman.
Cool.
Which is very scary. Have you ever read the short story that it came from?
Yes, I have. I had to think about it then. Yeah, no, I have read it. I remember being sent it.
It's really good. I suppose probably it would have been maybe the late 80s where I started reading Clive Barker's stuff. I didn't read his fantasy stuff. He's done a lot of massive chunky fantasy novels, which is not quite my bag. But Books of Blood were a big part of my reading, and The Forbidden, which is the story that led to Candyman, is very creepy, but in a different way. It's set in Liverpool, and it's I always wished I love Candyman, and they do an amazing job of shifting it to this quite terrifying in its own way part of Chicago, Cabrini Green, which is a real place, and you can kind of tell. But there's a lot of talk on the extras where they shot in a real housing project, and it was pretty dangerous to film there, and that does kind of come across in the film. But I always wished maybe they could one day do the short story version somehow and set it in Liverpool.
Liverpudlian Candyman.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's totally different, isn't it? Because there's no connection really. He's a blonde, very pale guy in the short story.
Yeah.
Who smells of candy. It's all quite different, but very disturbing because it's a very recognisable kind of Thatcher era, depressing Liverpool. And it's quite a different experience. It's got the kind of I suppose the essence of what became the film, but the film did a great job of moving it to America, which I suppose no one was really going to want a big horror movie set in Liverpool in 1992. But one of the great adaptations, maybe, where the movie was very different to the short story, which is
sure.
Cool. But it is good. It's got some great scares. That very first scene, I think I remember being really spooked by when he first appears. But there's some fantastic. The jump scare I always remember is where it's just that dialogue scene with the psychiatrist and Virginia Madsen, and Candyman randomly appears, but you only know he's appeared because there's a massive hook that's suddenly poking out of the psychiatrist, and blood is spraying out everywhere.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I always thought the sequels were quite bad. Like number 3 is awful. I just thought that was total toilet. And I went back and watched the second one, which I always thought was okay, and it really is just relentless jump scares, and it really cheapens Tony Todd's performance and presence, which is a bit of a shame because there was such potential there. But the first one is great.
Yeah, I've not seen the sequels. Is Tony Todd? Is he Candyman in them, or did they get someone else?
Yeah, he's back for both. Yeah, it's the best thing about them. The second one is definitely better than the third one. The second one is worth a look, I would say. It has flashbacks to him as a slave and him getting his hand hacked off, and the reason the bees are such a big part of his supernatural presence. But it's also got kind of annoying things like a much weaker main character instead of Virginia Madsen. The third one is really dodgy. The third one's like a cheap slasher film, which totally wastes the setting of Mexican Day of the Dead. But yeah, the first one is leagues ahead of what came after, which is a shame. But yeah, let's hope the next one, or the new one, is
brings it back.
And that's coming out as we speak. I've got a weird feeling, unless it's been changed, things have changed, but it's due out at the end of the month, I think. It was originally, at least. We shall see.
We shall see. It's, I had a few setbacks.
Yeah, it was due out last year, wasn't it? Like a lot of things.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah. What's your number 5, Sarah?
Gosh, we're up to number 5 already.
Oh, no.
Okay, cool. Number 5 for me is Cemetery Man, 1994, or De la Morte de l'Amour.
Beautiful.
Into zombie territory. Hooray!
Yes.
It's such a beautiful film. It's just another one I really want to rewatch because it's been a couple of years since I watched it. And I have a lovely, lovely Shameless release of it that I really love. But yeah, it's such a great movie.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah, this was a tough one to leave out from my list, really, because it's great, isn't it? This was the one great Italian horror film of the 90s, really.
Yeah.
Which is a shame because obviously that was the big theme in the 80s, or the early 80s, was Italian horror. And
it has some great visuals, very Italian-esque, with the Grim Reaper and the Angel of Death, and crazy, scary zombie naked woman.
Yes, and I always liked Rupert Everett's fantastic,
He's great.
hilarious, and very attractive. And I always liked, is his assistant, or is he called Nagi? What's that guy,
Yeah,
the sidekick?
yeah, it is
Love him.
Nagi. Yeah.
Nagi, yeah. He sticks out in memory. Great gore.
Mm.
It's also beautiful. I haven't seen it for a long time, so I'm very vague. But I remember hasn't
Yeah.
it got that really beautiful snow globe ending where it takes you through the snow
Yes.
globe or something, or
Yeah.
goes back on one. Yeah,
Yeah. Yes,
nice.
that's definitely in need of a rewatch on that one.
Yeah, great movie. That guy was mad talented. Directed by Mikhail Salvi, who did Stage Fright and The Sect. Um, yeah, Delamonte. Fantastic. We should have done more of that. They did a boring American film based on the same comic book, didn't they? Called Dylan Dog, Dead of Night, I think it was called, which is the name of the comic book.
Oh,
Wait up.
sorry. Yeah, I'm just slowly choking.
Oh
No, it's all
no!
good.
Excellent. If you're sure you're okay.
Oh dear. Right, I'm good now. Sorry.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yes.
Where are we up to? We're up to number 5.
Number 5. Yes. Number 5 is for me. Sorry. Yes. Number 5 is Misery for me.
Oh, hooray!
Yes, yeah. I had to put this in there. I was kind of stewing over it a little bit, and there was some decent Stephen King films in the 90s, and we did go through them quite a bit, I think, in the King podcast last year.
We did.
But I do think Misery is the best, and Misery is one of the best of all time as far as King adaptations go. I read the book in the late 80s, and the book's fantastic. The book's, as people probably know listening, the book's quite a lot more gruesome than the film. Like, she hacks off his foot in the book, and she kills someone with a lawnmower. But the essence of the book is massively in the film. The film does a fantastic job. The perfect casting, which is always the trick with Stephen King characters, because he writes such amazing characters. It's hard to get the right people, but often they do. And Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes, James Caan getting increasingly fed up and bitter in the bed as Paul Sheldon. It's just a brilliant film, and it's mostly just a two-hander. It's mostly just them in one room, and there's great suspense. I always remember the great suspense of him trying to escape. He painfully managed to escape from bed with his totally screwed legs, and gets back in bed in time. But she knows he's moved, because she knows that the penguin, the ceramic penguin she's got,
moved, yeah.
is facing due east rather than due west, or whatever it is. Annie Wilkes's mannerisms are perfect. Again, they're directly ported over from the book. Like, she never swears, so she says things like cock-a-doodie. She's got that great speech about the paper where he moans because she's got the wrong paper. All that stuff is just as good as all the horror stuff, really. They do tone it down, but everybody remembers the hobbling scene where you get that. Probably
it still makes you wince.
It does. And I listened to something recently where I think the actual shot of the foot shifting as she whacks it with the sledgehammer, I think that's less than a second long, but the image of his face and the sound effects, and you know exactly what she's going to do before she does it, makes it one of the great horrifying things, and proves that sometimes the things that have no blood at all are the most shocking things. Although then again, I always felt really sorry for Annie Wilkes, and Kathy Bates is such a great actress that she makes you scared of her, but she makes you feel really sorry for her as well. And she has those moments where she's just very, very sad. And I do find it quite disturbing at the end, where he fights back and he fucks her over the head with a typewriter and shoves the burnt bits of paper in her mouth, which apparently was a big part of that scene was a full life-size KMB dummy of Kathy Bates, which you'd never know.
No.
Astonishing. But yeah, it's a fantastic film, one of my all-time favorites, in fact. So there was no question Misery had to be in there, and it ended up at number 5.
Sure. Yay, that's cool. Yeah. Okay, my number 4. My number 4 is Tremors 1990. Good old Kevin
Tremors.
Bacon in the old, what do they call them? Oh, I've forgotten what they call them.
Oh, Earl and... Oh, you
Yeah,
mean the worms?
what do they call them?
Graboids?
Graboids, that's the one. I completely forgot what they were called then. Oh, yeah, no, Tremors was one of the ones that that used to get me. Because we both live out in the country. I'd quite often get a feeling that something was coming up under the ground. I'd just leg it. I mean, not the graboids.
It's fantastic. It is
Good
great,
old
isn't it?
Kevin Bacon. Love him in that.
He is great. Fred Ward is fantastic as
Yeah.
well, isn't he? It's got that great tiny town atmosphere. The worms are great. We watched it at the
Yeah, they're
start of the
really
year.
scary.
We had like a family watch of it in
Yeah.
at Christmas actually, and it really holds up.
Nice.
Um, yeah. Did you watch there's now I think there's 7 sequels. Did you watch any of them?
Yeah, no, I've never watched any of them in order. I think the recent one is Bloodlines.
Oh, yeah.
No. Sorry, hang on. Bloodlines was 5. Tremors: A Cold Day in Hell was 2018. So I think that's the recent one. I think I picked that up from the supermarket.
There's so many, isn't it? And I think it's the most recent ones that have got Jamie Kennedy in. Is it one of those that you've seen?
Yes, that is it. Yes, that's A
Ah,
Cold Day in Hell.
oh, that is, yeah, of course, yeah. I watched the first couple, and there's a couple that are okay. I think I watched the second and third one. I remember the second one being quite good. The third one is where they're flying, and it's a bit dodgy,
Oh God, no,
dodgy
I've
90s
not seen that one.
CGI. And there's a fourth one, which is like a flashback one, where it's the what's that guy's name? The gun fanatic. The Michael Gross character, I think. Is it Michael Gross? But he's the focus. Fred Ward's long gone, and there's like a flashback of one of his descendants. I think the whole
Hmm.
episode is like a western. But yeah, it's impressive. I know someone that thinks the sequels are fantastic, or at least the most recent one. So I'm wondering if it's worth having a dip and checking in on them.
Yeah,
But the first one is great chemistry between them, clever mixture of monster stuff and comedy. So
yeah. It's a good concept, kind of like Critters, only scarier.
yes, yeah, in that same mold, isn't it?
Mm.
Absolutely. Great choice. Number
Mhm.
4. So yeah, my number 4 is The Silence of the Lambs,
Ah.
which I think is fantastic. It always was. It was a massive hit, a rare horror movie. In fact, the only horror movie, unless you count things like The Shape of Water, the only horror movie to win the Best Picture Oscar. In fact, it won the 5 main Oscars that year, which was unheard of. Exorcist got nominated for a lot, but I think only won for Best Sound or some kind of token gesture like that. Um, but yeah, Silence of the Lambs was huge at the time. It was another one with a massive marketing push that was kind of saying it was the scariest movie of all time because it had
Mhm.
such a massive hype in America. And it is superb. I was a fan of the book. Um, Hannibal Lecter has gone through lots of incarnations and probably will come back again in some form. But since all these films came out, obviously the TV series blew us away, and we'll talk about it properly in
Oh
one
God,
episode, I'm
yeah.
sure.
One day. Yeah.
Outstanding. I think the TV series is actually the best adaptation of that character that's ever happened. But before Hannibal Lecter became a kind of pantomime villain, which he did in Red Dragon later on, and
Hmm.
Hannibal, which is the one with Ray Liotta having his
Hmm.
brain opened and eaten in front of him.
Hmm.
Silence of the Lambs is genuinely scary. I mean, Buffalo Bill, I think, is a fantastically disturbing character,
Yes.
uh, skinning his humps, and Jodie Foster is great in it, and it was the best of Anthony Hopkins' portrayals of the character. Mostly, I think, because he's in it very sparsely, like he's mostly confined to a cell. I think
Yeah.
his screen time is 15 minutes or something like that in total, even
Is
though
that
it
right?
feels longer. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very sparse. And there was controversy at the time because he won the Best Actor Oscar, but there was a lot of controversy that he should have won Best Supporting Actor because his screen time is so small.
Mm.
Um, but because you just feel his presence through the entire film, I think
Yeah.
it's very clever. And that's the secret, I think, with a character like that in the movies. The more you saw of him in the later ones, the less interesting he became.
Yeah.
But it kind of led the way for a lot of things. It led the way for all those crime shows like CSI that have graphic autopsies, and X-Files was doing the same thing. Scully in X-Files is very influenced by Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs. The style of it was very influential. And some great horror scenes, like straight out of things like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, things like the moment where he escapes by wearing the face of someone. And a lot of suggested violence, but when the gore happens, it's fairly shocking. And the joke at the end, having an old friend for dinner, which I think is a nice punchline. But yeah, Silence of the Lambs, great film, holds up. Loads of repeat viewings that I've had over the years. It really holds up. And I think, if I'm right, it's getting like a 30th anniversary 4K release this year, I think, which is, totally deserved. So that's my number 4. Top 3.
Dun, 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 top 3. Okay. My number 3 is 1990s Night of the Living Dead, directed by Tom Savini.
Ah, yes. Excellent.
It's great fun. It's a great remake of the original. He kind of goes down the different lines of getting Barbara to be a little bit more badass.
Sure. Yeah.
So without trying to be exactly the same as it was for Romero, he tried to mix it up a bit, but using the same kind of story, same kind of setting. They still have your Coopers and your... What's Barbara's brother called? Why am I forgetting? Johnny, yeah. You still have Johnny, yeah. With our familiar, lovely, awesome practical effects done by Tom Savini and all those guys. It's a good thing.
Yeah. It just changed things up a bit, doesn't it? Like the opening bit is different, isn't it? In the graveyard with Johnny. Yeah.
It's a little bit more lively.
And the ending, what's the change? I remember the ending shifts. What's the change in the ending? Does Ben still get shot in the cellar? It's different though, isn't it?
Oh God.
I'm sure it's a twist. It's a spin on the end.
Yes, I think you're right. But off the top of my head, that's not coming to me. I've just got like Bill Moseley as Johnny in my head now.
Yeah, it's a good cast, isn't it? Tom Towles is in there. Isn't Tom Towles? Is it Harry Cooper? Harry.
Yep, he's Cooper. Yep.
And Tony Todd and
Tony
Bill
Todd.
Moseley.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic cast.
Patricia Tallman as Barbara.
Yeah. I quite like it because it's quite creepy, isn't it? It's not as gory as something like Dawn of the Dead. It's more about trying to bring some creepiness back to the zombies. Which I think
kind of go for more of a heroine type angle. Like you say, I think you've said in the past, kind of turning Barbara into more of your kind of Sigourney Weaver, Ripley type character.
Yeah, massively so. That was the thing, wasn't it? After Ripley shifted in Aliens, we were in the realms of things like New Barbara, and ultimately, I suppose, people like Sydney and Scream, and definitely things like Buffy, which came in the 90s as well.
Yeah.
And then those things spun off, I guess, into things like Mila Jovovich in the Resident Evil films.
Sure, yeah.
Superhuman almost by the time you got to those things. But yeah, it's a good remake, actually. I suppose it's one of those first remakes of something from the 60s, or horror classics from the modern era. It's probably the first one on the block, I guess, because at that stage it'd only been 22 years since the old one, so that's quite a small gap, actually, in retrospect.
I suppose, yeah.
And there would have been the usual naysayers moaning about it before it came out, but fantastic. Night of the Living Dead. So my number 3 is a slightly left field choice, but I do think it's one of the scariest ones on the list, which is Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, which is the spin-off stroke prequel to the series. Twin Peaks, obviously. Twin Peaks wasn't really a horror series. It was like a soap opera, sometimes gate crashed by horrible things happening. And it was terrifying at times. The character of Bob which 30-year-old spoiler alert, Bob is an evil spirit that possesses the nice dad played by Ray Wise so well to kill his own daughter, and that was the Who Killed Laura Palmer twist that was built. The whole show was built around. The prequel is where David Lynch was obviously kind of restrained by what he could show on network TV in 1990. So there is some horrifying moments in the series of Twin Peaks, but the film is where he could pretty much have freedom to be as disturbing as he wanted, and it really is terrifying. It's much more explicit. It's basically showing the last 7 days of Laura Palmer's life before she's murdered by her effectively possessed dad. And it's really disturbing. I mean, it shows her on a downward spiral. You know that the film's only going to end one way, which is she's going to be dead by the end. And you're seeing lots more creepy stuff of Bob creeping into her room at night to kind of abuse her. But obviously it's really her dad who doesn't know what's going on because he's been possessed by Bob. So you've got awful sense of dread from the dad kind of being a bit oblivious but gradually realizing what's going on, and the hideous sight of this long-haired character of Bob being around. I find it really frightening, actually. It was one of those things that really kind of gave me some nightmares back in the 90s. It does also have some really weird and distressing scenes. There's a nightclub scene where people are talking about important stuff, but you can't hear any of it because the music drowns it out. And later versions of it, I think on video, had subtitles, which missed the point, is that you weren't supposed to hear it.
Yeah.
There is the most disturbing traffic jam I've ever seen in a film as well, which is a horrible moment, which you just wish would end. It's just horrible. But because it's David Lynch, there's also kind of some really surprising moments of, I guess, tenderness. There's an almost sentimental ending, which somehow works really well because everything else in it has been so disturbing. So it does have, it's not just a total downer, but it's brilliantly done. And it's got everybody's in it. You know, David Bowie shows up for about 20 seconds running down the corridor. And it's the most disturbing 20 seconds of all time because you're like, what the fuck's going on? It's David Bowie.
What the hell is David Bowie in this?
And what I like is that, I mean, it was a famous flop at the time. The series had already been cancelled because the series was huge for a moment. But as soon as the mystery was solved, everybody tuned out, except me, and obviously fans. But what I like about it is the series had horror in it, but the series was balanced by a lot of quirky humor, a lot of kind of one-liners, catchphrases, soap opera plot lines, and the film basically says, we're giving you none of that. It throws them all away. It has hardly any humor at all. It cuts all the kind of quirky characters that were in the TV series. It smashes a TV set in the very first scene to say, well, this is the movie instead. And it's kind of become this horror movie version of Twin Peaks. So yeah, that's one of my favourites.
Oh, nice. Cool. Oh, right, so we're on to number 2. This was, something that I kept swapping them around, my number 1 and my number 2, but I settled on number 2 being Dead Alive, open brackets, Brain Dead, 92, Peter Jackson. We love that one. We love old Lionel.
Lionel. Yes. That's a classic, isn't it?
It is a classic. It's a classic. Just the lawnmower. What more can you say? The lawnmower sequence is just probably one of the best things you'll ever see. Just buckets of blood everywhere, and obviously the mother's great. Old Vera. I can't remember what is it that bites it. It's a Sumatran
rat monkey.
I keep wanting to call it a rat squirrel.
Rat squirrel. Yes. Rat squirrel. It's one of them. One of those common Sumatran rat monkeys. You see them everywhere these days. Everyone's got one.
Yeah.
It's mental, isn't it? It just keeps going and going. It's incredible, actually. I haven't seen it for a long time, though.
Yeah. It's silly. It's stupid. It's a kind of love story comedy with crazy priests and stupid interfering mothers and lawnmowers. I don't know. It's just brilliant. Love it.
It was a big word of mouth thing in the 90s. Like, it was the one thing, you know, if you ever, because as soon as somebody found out you're a horror fan, they'd be, what's the scariest thing you've ever seen? Or what's the goriest thing you've ever seen? And Brain Dead, of course, was the one you could always wheel out, because as soon as Brain Dead had happened, everything after that, even if it was very gory, well, it's not really as gory as Brain Dead.
No.
It's the lawnmower. I've not seen it for so long, but the lawnmower scene from memory goes on for a very long time, or it seems
really
it does.
long time.
It's a total massacre. And all the gags, and it's quite sweet, isn't it? Because Lionel's quite a sweet, dopey character from memory.
He's cute.
And it's all very good natured. It's one of those rare films that's a total bloodbath, but is very good natured somehow. Taps into that kind of sense of humour that a lot of Australian and New Zealand films have as well, I think. Yeah. I still think that I really like Lord of the Rings. I really do, but I still think that the early stuff is easily my favourite Peter Jackson
For
stuff.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he went on to do great things, but just got to remember that Brain Dead's got to be one of the best.
Yeah. At no point in the Lord of the Rings films does the extremely boring Orlando Bloom say, "Oh, I kick ass for the Lord." That never happens. I mean, that would be the only thing that would make it worthwhile watching.
Yeah, and no body parts fall into anyone's soup or anything.
No. Although I suppose there are gory moments, isn't there, in Lord of the Rings, where you think, oh, okay, that's a bit of the Peter Jackson from old.
Yeah, that we know and love, yeah.
That he was allowed to do within the confines of a PG or 12 film.
Sneak in a little bit.
Yeah, great fun. I do like Bad Taste. Meet the Feebles is bonkers.
Yeah.
But Brain Dead is the best of them, isn't it?
It sure is.
Nice choice. Love it. Number
You're
two.
number two.
Well, we've had it already, and it kind of tossed around a bit in the list, but Blair Witch Project is my number two.
Yay!
Very tricky, actually, to put these in order, but I think because it stays with you so much, I think it had to be higher than some of the ones we've just mentioned. So simple, such a great concept. The way it's done is really good. The last 5 minutes, I truly think when they go to the house and Mike's facing the wall and you see the handprints of kids on the wall and things like that. The last 5 minutes, I think, alone really are in the top horror stuff of all time, you know, as far as creepiness goes.
Yeah.
But the build-up's so good. The build-up's really good. And I think, although people, I think, missed the point, the people that disliked it missed the point of, those characters are so annoying. Well, yeah, they are, because they're people that are stuck in the woods and they're going around in circles, and you would be Heather or you would be Josh in that situation.
Sure.
They were believable characters, and you're not necessarily supposed to like them,
No.
but you're supposed to relate to them, I guess. And they play that really well, and she's really good, and you do kind of root for her, even though, you know, it's kind of her fault because she wants to carry on filming. And I think it does that really well. The films after this, not all of them, Wreck, I think we've talked about, is awesome, and a lot of others are, but I think it does a great job of actually making you think, well, yeah, she's so focused on this project that, yeah, maybe it makes sense that she's still filming, even though you really should just try and get out of there.
Yeah, you should be getting out of there now. Yeah.
But then if you don't buy into her keeping filming, then the film doesn't work anyway, because of course it doesn't exist unless she carries on filming. But most importantly, it's just terrifying, and it's the one of the few films where you see nothing, and it could just be about 3 people going mad while they get lost in the woods, or there could be a witch, but you see nothing anyway. But it's so disturbing. So yeah, that's my number 2.
So good. Yeah, I feel bad that I put it so far down my list now.
Oh, it's okay. We won't tell them.
Really need to watch it again. Did you like the you did like the sequel, didn't you? The 2016 Blair Witch, the follow-on. I
quite like, I'm that person that really liked the second one, because the second one's almost like a total deconstruction of the first one. The second one is I think quite misunderstood and deliberately is the opposite of the first one. But the 2016 one I quite liked. It's by Thingy, isn't it? Oh man, it's gone. It'll come.
Adam Wingard.
Yeah, Adam Wingard, who's had a mental career of doing stuff like You're Next, and now he's done Kong versus Godzilla. And is a really nice guy in interviews. And yeah, I think they did a good job. I think it did fall victim. It's tricky, isn't it? Because they show quite a lot in the new one, and it's quite gory and it's quite jump scary. But I don't think they could have done the same as the 90s one ever again. So what else can you do except kind of be scary in different ways? But I quite liked it. Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Good.
It's a bold move.
Sure. Right, we're up to our number ones.
Good God, yes. Number one.
My number one is probably very predictable, but it's Army of Darkness, 1992, by Sam Raimi, the third Evil Dead movie. Just because it's the third Evil Dead movie. I love this movie so much. It's so funny, it's so quirky. It has cool little stop motion skeletons.
Oh, it does.
Necronomicons, lots and lots of Bruce. Perfect.
Yeah. Yep.
Has to be number one.
It's it got some stick, didn't it? Because it's the least horror-y,
Yeah.
or it's the least gory of the three, but then the whole point was to make it this big adventure thing, right? This big medieval dead thing.
Yeah.
Great sequences. I've not seen it for a while, but I like the stop motion a lot. I like the nods to that stuff. Mini Ash and
the little mini ashes, and then the weird monster in the snake pit right at the beginning.
Yes.
His shop S-Smart speech. This is my boomstick.
This is the point, isn't it? Because the second one does it, but this is the point where it really was all about one-liner Ash and about the quotable Ash, wasn't it? There's some of that in the second one. The second one though is very kind of intense as well as being hilarious. But the third one is entirely about Bruce, right?
Yeah, that's why I love it. That's why it's number one.
There's none more Bruce than the third one.
Absolutely.
And that's cool. And I like it, actually. I like the fact that because they could never. It's the same with Blair Witch, isn't it? They could never recreate the gore fest of the first one or the kind of foot through the floor mental stuff of the second one. So they had to do something, in this case, I guess, more Three Stooges like.
Yeah, very.
Which was their thing anyway, wasn't it?
Yeah, it always was, but yeah, they went for it mega in this one.
It is great fun. My dad is and was a big fan of the Evil Dead films, and I know we watched all of those again. I think, and we watched the third one on video when it came out. The first two we'd kind of caught up with later because it'd been out for a while, but the third one I know we were both excited about, and he absolutely loved the third one. He thought, I really like that, Stephen. I thought, because it doesn't usually fight. He's like a lot of dads, I guess. It's always a bit hit and miss as to whether he'll find a comedy funny. So with this, I was slightly worried because it was more comedic, and he was laughing and he thought it was tremendous, and still does. He's got those movies that are handy Christmas things to buy him. He's got the T-shirt. My dad's always really pleased when he's out and about wearing his Army of Darkness T-shirt, and somebody says, "Oh, hey, I like your T-shirt, man," because the Norfolk Army of Darkness fans are out there somewhere.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, totally get it. Where did you see Army of Darkness for the first time?
Oh, it was on video.
Kind of close to when it came out, or later on?
I would say later on. Yeah, it was. When was it? 92. Yeah, it was definitely later on from that. It was probably 95, 96.
Okay, but had you watched you watched the three in the right order?
Yeah. Well, I think I watched Evil Dead 2 first.
Oh, okay, cool.
That was my first one. Then I watched Evil Dead, and then someone went, "Oh, there's the third one." It's like, oh my god.
Yeah.
So a few years down the line, I think I kind of moved on to other things, and then suddenly went, "Oh my god."
Yeah, it's weird in Britain because the same happened here actually, and it's because of how things worked out. Like Evil Dead was famously and unbelievably banned in Britain.
Yeah.
It was one of the key, as mental as it sounds to anyone with a sane head, video nasties, and it wasn't allowed to come out on video again until 1990, when it was then cut by about 2 minutes. Ridiculous stuff cut, the most mental stuff you can imagine. But yeah, same here. Because of that, Evil Dead 2 was allowed out in about 88. And so I would have watched Evil Dead 2 on video first and then saw the cut version of Evil Dead, the first one. And it was years before we saw the proper uncut Evil Dead, but Army of Darkness came out in the middle. So strange over here, really, the way it worked out. Yeah, cool choice, man. Top of the pops. My number one.
Which is yours?
is Seven, the
Yay.
which I had to choose. Second David Fincher film on the list. He directed Alien 3, was his first film, and he went on to do things like Fight Club and the really boring The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Do you not like that one?
Oh, I hate it. I really hate it.
Really? Oh, I
And
don't mind it, but I'm with you. It's compared to the other two, it's very, very,
yeah.
very, very boring.
He's a very good filmmaker, and of course he's a big part of Mindhunter these days. Which Mindhunter is very, I suppose, connected to Seven and very connected to Zodiac, which is a great film that he made. He made about a decade after Seven. But Seven I think is brilliant, terrifying. This was my most intense experience in the cinema in the 90s, so it had to be number one, no question. Saw it in the cinema. I had no idea where it's going. The trailers actually made it look like a kind of standard detective film. And the build-up, I think, is really clever in that way, because you think, well, okay, this is a bit more disturbing than usual. There's a big fat guy, his stomach's just exploded. But at a certain point, you realise, oh, fuck, I don't know where this is going to go. This isn't just going to be like Helen Mirren on TV and Prime Suspect, or Dempsey and Makepeace, to quote a much older one. And there's a point where more and more disturbing stuff happens, and you're not seeing any of it. You're always turning up after it's happened because you're following the detectives. And you're kind of worried because Brad Pitt's really twitchy all the way through it. Morgan Freeman's very glum and Morgan Freeman-ish. And then there's a point where the lust killing happens, and it dawns on me in the cinema, oh Christ, because again you don't see it, but you realise that this guy that's total distress has been forced to wear this hideous thing.
Yeah, man.
And the very images that you're getting in your head, because everything is left to your imagination.
You don't need to see it because you're just imagining. That's the thing. You're always sitting there going, when I watched it, I was like, oh, I hope they actually get to. I'm like, I hope we get to see all 7 of the kills, because I want to know what this one is. And then you're like, oh my god, something's happened. Which one is it? Which one is it? Is it sloth? Is it greed? Oh my god, I don't know.
And it's
which
out of control. And this never happens. I've never had it since, I don't think. I never had it before, where I'm watching, especially a big film like this, big Hollywood film, big stars, Brad Pitt, etc. I was like, wow, all bets are off. Mostly, a lot of the time, you can guess what the ending's going to be. You think it's going to be all right. It'll be all right in the end. They'll catch him. It'll be a bit nasty.
Yeah.
But here, so the last thing happens, and I'm like, Christ, because that's such a disturbing idea. The spaghetti guy that's force-fed until his gut explodes is disgusting, and the idea of someone being forced to hack off a pound of flesh and all that kind of stuff, cutting your nose off to spite your face, that's a very disturbing thing that you have to imagine. But then there's a point where you realize, oh god, the movie, oh wait, it's a 2-hour movie, it's about half an hour to go, and the killer's given himself up, and that's the point where you think, okay, this is something different now, and I don't know where this is going to go. And what happens at the very end, of course, is legendary and horrifying, and the darkest possible ending any film could ever have, because the killer wins. His entire plan is successful. Brad Pitt becomes Wrath and all that kind of stuff. I still argued with people. I remember being at school, maybe it was college actually by that time, arguing with someone that said, how'd you find Seven? And this person that I was friends with, oh, it's disgusting. It's one of the most graphically violent things I've ever seen. No, it wasn't. And she said, she genuinely thought she'd seen Gwyneth Paltrow getting her head cut. No, you never see the head.
No, you never. No, you don't even. Yeah, exactly. You don't even see it.
But I love the fact that it had such an impact on her that she thought she'd seen it, because that's the biggest trick a horror film could ever do. I also think Seven has got. We talked about the Exorcist 3, which I do still think is classic in terms of shock moments, but nothing ever made me jump more than the bit where the sloth victim suddenly comes to life in the bed.
Oh yeah, that's creepy. Yeah.
that's an amazing piece of
makeup. He cannot be alive. Yeah, absolutely.
And the very idea that this guy, who like a lot of the characters who's been killed, is this I think he's a pedophile, isn't he, in the film, but he'd been effectively tied to the bed and just kept alive for about a year, so he was starving but not quite dead. But with the big cinema sound, and this was been one of the first 18 rated films I ever saw in the cinema, that scene totally shut me up. and then kept me thinking. So all the way along, all the way after Seven, it wasn't just that the film was really impactful in the cinema. It was just I kept thinking about it, and I was disturbed by the sloth thing, by the idea that this was planned all along, and yeah, it's outstanding, and it's so witty as well. I love all the jokes in it. There's loads of really dark jokes in it, like Brad. They talk about at one stage the Marquis de Sade, and Brad Pitt pronounces it Marquis de Sade, and Sade was a
Yeah.
big pop singer at the time, thanks to Smooth Operator.
Mm-hmm.
um, and the grim one-liners, and they talk about the sloth guy, and they say, "Oh yeah, and he's still got hell to look forward to." um,
Yeah, the Doctor is like totally like deadpan about the whole thing, isn't he? It's like, well, you're not
yes,
going to get anything out of him.
yeah,
He's
yeah, that's right.
completely brain dead, and yeah, he's got hell to look forward to.
Yeah, and there's a joke as well, isn't there? Where and I've seen this film a lot of times, but so I always remember. But there's a joke as well where they talk about, again in a very blasé way, that he's chewed through his own tongue, and someone says, I think it's Brad Pitt says, "Oh, he's the ideal tenant," tenant with no tongue.
Yeah,
Landlord's dream.
he's had his rent paid on time and everything.
Yes, but
And they've covered up the smell by just hanging up like a million magic trees.
yes, because the FBI burst in, don't they? And you're totally bewildered. You have no idea where it's going to go. They find what you think is the body, and he's surrounded by magic air freshener. Yeah,
Yeah,
um, it's got the best ending, I think, of possibly any film I've ever seen. The very idea of it, and the fact that what was so disturbing, I think, in the cinema, is that the whole film is dark and torch lit and raining all the time, and then
yeah.
for the
Not
darkest
just
bit,
slightly raining,
yeah, torrential
absolutely
rain,
pissing it down. Yeah,
pissing it down. Bloody weather is the theme of the film. Uh,
depressing.
and
Yeah,
then for the most disturbing bit, it suddenly cuts to the broad daylight of the desert, which is where the most
true.
horrifying thing happens. And it does the psycho thing of the subliminal cut of Gwyneth Paltrow's face at the key moment for less than a second on the screen. Yeah, I think it's one of the greats, no question. I was
Hmm.
blown away by Seven in the '90s, and it was hugely influential. Like it seemed after that, everything was coming out. Serial killer films set in torrential rain with twist
Mm.
endings. Um,
Hmm.
Millennium, the TV series, did that every week. It was Seven every week, basically.
Yeah,
Uh,
you can see a lot of Saw in it as well.
very
Obviously,
much.
not. Yeah, the idea, of the intelligent killer and someone that actually thinks rather than
Yes.
just killing random people. There's a choice there.
Yeah, very much the puppet master kind of killer
Mm.
that's in control behind the scenes, um, is a huge part of it. I also like the fact that um, the writer of Seven was always very blunt about what he was trying to do, because I think at the time the critics were, oh, it's a thriller, it's not really a horror film, and they asked him, he's like, oh yeah, I wrote it as a slasher film, and he made a joke about it being a pretentious slasher film or something like that. But and ultimately it is, but it's just extremely good. So
Mm.
yeah, that's kind of it. Um, and it's got a great soundtrack, and it brings us back to the '90s, because one of the best, most memorable things about the soundtrack is Nine Inch Nails again. Uh,
Again, yeah,
the
or
title
Trent Reznor.
sequence
Yeah,
of that great disturbing title sequence of Seven. Even the credits run backwards. That was another thing. The credits
yeah,
are the wrong way round.
yeah.
And Kevin Spacey
They
wasn't in the
didn't mention
marketing
him.
or anything. So
Yeah,
at the time,
so you
I
didn't know
think
who
The
he's
Usual
going to be.
Suspects, and he was great in that. And
Yeah.
suddenly Kevin Spacey's in the film. What? This wasn't. No, what? Eh? John Doe. Yes, I was slightly obsessed with Seven. So we just briefly have some time to mention some honorable mentions, Sarah. Anything you want to mention that didn't make the
Yeah.
top 10?
Oh, let me have a quick look. Um, oh, Interview with the Vampire.
Yes, great. I like that. Yeah,
We kind of mentioned that. Another Brad Pitt one. We like that one. Return of the Living Dead 3.
that's fantastic. I like that one a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
really great call. Great.
Um, yeah, great lead lady as well.
Yeah, very iconic. Yeah, I like Return of the Living Dead 3 a lot, actually.
Yeah, oh man, there's so many. Bride of Reanimator.
Yes. Yep.
Not quite as good as Reanimator, but it's still a lot of fun, especially for early 90s. iZombie: The Chronicles of Pain, which is one that I never actually saw at the time. I saw many years later, but I love that slow burn zombie movie.
nicely done, and British as well.
Yeah. Flatliners.
Flatliners, yeah.
That's another one that I probably watched almost as much as I watched The Crow.
Yeah, that was a big kind of, again, gothy kind of early 90s thing, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Idle Hands.
That's quite fun, actually. I like that.
Quite a lot of fun. Oh, there's another one I haven't seen for a very long time. I just remember there being an inhaler, which you use as a bong.
Yes, of course.
And that's kind of all I remember about that one. Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, Sleepy Hollow is great. Yeah, I like Sleepy Hollow.
Do you know, there was a lot of Johnny Depp stuff about, kind of like Brad Pitt. He pop up in quite a lot of kind of 90s thrillery, gothic-y type movies, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he's in From Hell and things like that. Yeah.
Yep. And one last one for me, which didn't make it on my list. Event Horizon.
Yeah, Event Horizon's really good. It's tough, isn't it? But yeah, that's
So many
pretty
good
creepy
things.
stuff.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, a few. Nightbreed isn't perfect, but I always quite liked it. It's also got a lot of great, again, pre-CGI monsters and makeups and stuff. That's a very ambitious Clive Barker film. I really like The People Under the Stairs, the Wes Craven thing. That's one I always enjoyed. Body Snatchers, the remake by Abel Ferrara, really scary, really well done. Maybe not quite as good as the 70s one, but then few things are that good. Also, Return of the Living Dead 3 you mentioned, just because it's such an iconic character. The Julie back from the dead, I always thought was a very tragic and also just very striking character. We all kind of wanted to have body piercing after watching that.
Sure.
Interview with the Vampire, also I think Tom Cruise is fantastic in Interview with the Vampire. Great Lestat. Hated Queen of the Damned. Never read the books, but really liked Interview with the Vampire. I always thought that was something special and pretty cool, which surprised me at the time. The Frighteners I really like. The Frighteners again, Peter Jackson. Always liked Michael J. Fox. I think The Frighteners is pretty underrated. From Dusk Till Dawn was one of yours. Mimic, great monster movie. Fantastic creature effects in that. The Relic was a monster movie I really liked at the time. Blade. Kind of Marvel film before Marvel films were Marvel films, but proper good kind of 18 rated Marvel film. I do like Halloween H2O a lot. I think that's a cracking sequel, and I do like it better than the 2018 Halloween that brought Jamie Lee back. I think it's a much better film after watching both of them kind of repeated. From the end of the decade, The Sixth Sense, I think is one of the great ghost stories. Really effective. I like M. Night Shyamalan stuff anyway. And from Japan, a couple of things that almost made it to my list. Audition, which is terrifying and horrifying. And maybe a bit like Seven, kind of twists and you think, oh, it's going there, is it? And The Japanese Ring, which I still think is terrifying and a great example of what would become a cliche, but a great example of that kind of slow burn J-horror thing with very few jump scares, actually, but the ones that are in it, again, are really well timed. That's possibly it, although we could go on forever about, like you said, Event Horizon. Even things like Wishmaster are fun. There's a lot of things like...
Oh my God, yeah, love that.
The Faculty,
then,
you know?
Then there was like other things like not quite horror ones, like say Terminator 2.
Terminator
stuff like that.
Incredible.
The Darkman rather.
Yeah, Darkman
trilogy. Darkman. Although the first one, I prefer the first one. Even though I thought Liam Neeson was weird as Darkman, I think he's definitely better than the other guy in 2 and 3.
Yeah, it goes off a bit, doesn't it? They're okay, the sequels, but yeah, definitely. There was a few franchisey ones, like the Leprechaun films are pretty terrible, but they're kind of occasionally fun. The Phantasm sequels are good.
Yes, Troll 2.
Troll 2 is almost indescribable, but great. Has to be seen to be believed. And it is, it's hilarious though. Just tons of stuff.
Hellraiser 3.
There's a lot of Hellraiser 3 actually I really like. Yeah, it's got a great scene in the church, and there's things like Demon Knight is actually really fun. Species. I was thinking of Species when you were talking about Event Horizon, because it's the kind of
Oh,
sci-fi
yeah.
horror.
Yeah.
That was fairly iconic at the time. Yeah, The Dentist. The Dentist is mental.
The Dentist. I don't know
Almost
that one.
impossible to watch.
Yeah.
Cube.
Yeah.
Cube was basically
Cube.
Saw before Saw was Saw.
Yeah.
Cube. Saw is basically Cube mixed with Seven, as you suggested earlier with the Seven comparisons. I always
Yeah.
liked Keanu Reeves in The Devil's Advocate as well, which is quite a mad, bonkers Hollywood horror with Al Pacino as Satan. Yeah. um, Bride of Chucky, I think, is hilarious. And
Yeah.
still
Maniac
do.
Cop 2.
Yeah, that's really fun. I like Maniac Cop 2, man. Dr. Giggles as well, I always thought was great fun. Um, Innocent Blood is very underrated, the John Landis thing.
Mm-hmm.
Cannibal the Musical, Trey Parker, an early kind of pre-South Park thing with the classic song Let's Build a Snowman. Yeah, I think that's it. Maybe I can't think of anything else.
There's probably still
Mouth of
more,
Madness, John Carpenter, but we covered that on the Carpenter
and Body
cast.
Bags. Body Bags.
Yes, huge fun.
Great little anthology. The Cat in the Brain, although I'm not a massive fan of that.
Yeah,
Weird.
I used to really like that, but when we watched it, I found it a bit hard going, to be honest with you. I kind of lost it a bit with it, so maybe it isn't that good. It's a bit of a one-trick pony, maybe. But yeah, it was a great decade, I think. It was a good variety as well of the really kind of terrifying stuff, and then the kind of comedy horror things, which you can't ask for much than that, And we had great music, and I mean, we're old enough to go and do stuff. Halloween graveyards, exchanging Cradle of Filth CDs. We were really busy. Well, that was the 90s. I'm sure we'll hear again from the 90s at some point.
Hopefully.
Yes. But I think that's it, Sarah. It's it's been fun. It's very nostalgic. We've poured out our hearts. Next time will be more heart pouring or something like that, because next time, Sarah, we've got something extraordinary. We're going to be going to a different country, because to prove we're not just insulated Brits, we're going to go to Italy. We're going to be looking at the 4 big ones in the career of Lucio Fulci, whatever you call him, the master of splatter, or whatever you call him. One of the great Italian horror directors and horror directors generally of our time. We're going to be looking at Zombie Flesh Eaters, or Zombie 2, or whatever you call it in your own country, along with City of the Living Dead, House by the Cemetery, and The Beyond.
It's going to be so good.
Chewing over 4, let's face it, bonkers and spectacular gore movies. Some of the greatest gore effects of the time. So that will be episode 23, coming to you live at the end of September. Whew. But I think that's it, Sarah. We've run the well dry. So, yes, hopefully you've enjoyed this trip down memory lane, and will join us for the Fulci podcast. But that's really it from me. Anything else to add, Sarah, before we go into the night?
No, I think we're all good. I think 90s is well and truly covered. And yes, onward to the Fulci zombies.
Yeah, back to the early 80s again, where we belong, I suppose. But yes, until that magical night, thanks for listening, and it's good night from me.
And good night from me. Night.
Night, guys. Bye for now.